normal. Maybe we should get back.
Well, the lack of productivity, I think it's a catastrophe. I mean, there are times for it. If you're reading a boring report and you've got to just sort of read it or write it, that's fine.
But there's so many people as well who never had the option. They've got to stand on their feet. They're the backbone of this country, the hairdressers, the plumbers, the plasters, the security guards, and all the rest. Public Health Minister Andrew Gwynn, not just about cancer treatments, the postcode lottery, but also the junior doctor strikes, also the problems with concrete in schools and hospitals as well. So we'll be talking to Andrew Gwynn a little bit later on as well.
That is fascinating because this concrete, I was under the impression it was just the 50s, 60s and 70s, but it infers that actually it might have been used as late as the 1990s.
Yeah, up to the mid-90s,
If that's really the case, I mean, it depends if it was, but that could add hugely to this issue.
Richard, I was a special advisor in the Ministry of Housing for about a year and a half. Building safety was what kept me awake at night. It is a huge issue in this country.
Huge issue, and if we're designing buildings to last 30, 40 years, we are in deep, deep trouble. Have a great show, Peter Cardwell. Then, of course, after him, it will be Trisha Goddard. I will be back, same time, same place, next week. Thanks to my brilliant team, and thanks to all of you for listening with your great suggestions about dealing with all the issues, including Japanese knotweed. It's Tice Talk with talkTV.
This is talkTV.
Straight talking, no nonsense, and annoying all the right people. This is talkTV.
every day from Monday to Friday, 3 p.m. until 5 p.m. for news, views and a mega dose of attitude. Tune in if you dare.
Well, a very good afternoon. I'm Peter Cardwell. Cardi P here with you between now and 4 o'clock. And this is the first of a few, three actually, Sundays where I'm going to be here between 1 and 4. So an absolute pleasure to have your company and loads to talk about this Saturday afternoon. We're going to have two big debates. One of them is about working from home. The head of Zoom, yes, Zoom, those people who do the video calls, has said that people need to come back into his office. Time to stop doing the Zoom calls. What do you think? Has the time come to go back into the office if you're an office worker? Maybe you're not an office worker. Maybe you're someone who had to stand, who couldn't be at home and had to be in the office and had to be there, the backbone of Britain, the hairdressers, the plasters, the plumbers, the security guards who kept our country moving during COVID. Maybe you're a waiter or a waitress who did the same thing and had problems and couldn't work from home and had the economic problems. So, I mean, we're past the pandemic. There's so much that's happened since then. Time to get back to work? Or do you think working from home actually, it's changed your life, it's a bit better, it helps you with the kids, and but productivity, major problem in this country. We'll also be talking about national service. There's a Conservative candidate called Sebastian Payne. He is the head of a think tank called Onward. He is someone who has been on this station many times, and he is saying that national service should be brought back for young people. There are others who say, actually, the young people have maybe done a version of national service by being locked up in their universities, a lot of them, when the COVID was hit. So this whole legacy of COVID, the legacy of the lockdowns, what should we do to get our society back to normal? Because it's not back to normal, or maybe it has changed forever. What do you think? 0344 499 1000. I want to hear from you today. James is waiting to take your call. If you've never rung before, what you do, you ring up, you talk to James, you tell him your point, and then we put as many people as possible on the air between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Agree with me, disagree with me, whatever you like. 0344 499 1000. We're also talking today about school closures and hospitals and the concrete scandal, this rack scandal, this idea, this concrete that is not fit for purpose. We're also talking about a postcode lottery for NHS cancer patients. We'll have a big interview with the Shadow Public Health Minister, Andrew Gwynn. He'll be making his views clear on that and many other issues as well. The junior doctor strikes, the first week of ULEZ. Are you someone in outer London, for example? Believe it or not, the population of Scotland is the same as the population of outer London affected by the ULEZ. How has it affected you? Is it the end for Sadiq Khan? Some people say it is. And then, of course, we're looking forward to the fact that Parliament is coming back this week. It's back for 2 weeks. And then guess what? They're on recess again, because they are going to be going away to their party conferences. I'll be there in Liverpool and indeed in Manchester for those party conferences. Also, polyamorous relationships. Rita Ora, Carol Vorderman, Tilda Swinton are voted Britain's top polyamorous celebrities. Were you in a throuple? Would you be happy to be so? And also, we're in a situation where we not only have Cat of the Week on a Saturday, but for the next 3 weeks, we're going to try this as an experiment. We're doing Rescue Animal of the Week. So all of that coming up between now and 4 here on talkTV. Just a reminder that you can give me a ring. The phones are going already. The numbers are 0344 499 1000 if you want to give me a call. 0344 499 1000. You can write it down. You can put it on your phone. You can message me via text message. Put the word talk in your message just at the start. Talk, so it comes up on the screen in front of me. Send that to 87222. And also, if you want to tweet me, you can tweet me at talkTV, or you can follow me at Peter Cardwell. We'll get as many calls, texts and tweets into the programme. It's my programme, but it's your programme as well. And actually, I did say last week, if you see me around the streets or wherever, maybe I'm home in Northern Ireland or somewhere in England or whatever, always come up and say hello. And one woman did that. Her name is Tanya. And she introduced me to some of her friends who gave me, who run a little stall where they do fruit juice, and they blend the fruit and everything. It's delicious, and I got a free fruit juice, which is very, very kind of Tanya and her friends. So thank you very, very much to them for doing that. Also, I have a very loyal listener and viewer called Carol, who is having a bit of a rough time with her health at the moment. She's a bit of an accident. So Carol, I want to wish you a very, very speedy recovery, and thank you for your support and your loyalty and your messages. You're a great person. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch as well. Steve is in London and says national service for 16-year-olds. I can just see them all marching around the parade ground with their noses stuck in their phones. That's a very, very good point. Also from Richard to Peter, certainly Sunday, the perfect Sunday, check out the EDI letter from the pension regulator. We'll have a bit of a look at that as well, certainly as time goes on. I want to talk about national service now, because this is a really, really interesting one. Young people are unhappy, unskilled and unmoored. The answer is national service. And we've had Penny Mordaunt, for example, the former Defence Secretary, she is the leader of the House of Commons, saying that her belief that every 16-year-old in Britain should be automatically signed up for national service under a new plan. The proposal was to see teenagers participate in a 2-week civic exploration trip and complete a number of volunteering hours each year. Well, it doesn't quite sound like being in the military. It doesn't quite sound like national service back in the day. I wonder if there are people watching or listening who did national service. I'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. What do you think about this idea put forward by the think tank Onward? It shouldn't be compulsory, apparently, but the youth would have to opt out if they did not want to join. As many as 600,000 youngsters could be involved. Miss Mordaunt says the goodwill and community spirit would be fostered, energy and imagination of teens would be too. It would promote good mental health and resilience. I mean, there are some schemes already. There's there are all sorts of there are volunteering services. There's Duke of Edinburgh. There's all sorts of things that people do. But what do you think about this? And do you think actually it should be extended to encourage more people to join the army? Because of course our army and our armed forces are quite small at the moment. I remember someone telling me you could fit the whole lot of them into Wembley Stadium. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. We're going to debate this now between James Melville, who's a political commentator, and Professor Ashok Kumar, who is Professor of Political Economy at Birkbeck University. Both gents, you're very, very welcome to the programme today. James, maybe I could start with you. Why do you think this is a good idea?
I think it's a good idea in part. The idea going from the government might not be so sort of legitimate based on what our government have done to our children and our youth over the last few years through the lockdown response and the spike in mental health. So I think it's a bit rich for the government to come out with that sort of data, considering they're the cultivators of a lot of it.
Well, it's interesting, James. Sorry to interrupt you, James, but it was interesting. One commentator I saw online was saying, well, actually, maybe young people have sort of slightly done their national service. Maybe they've been in, they've been locked up during lockdown. Many of them were paying huge amounts of money to sit in student accommodation, not really allowed to go out, and on Zoom lectures and so on. So maybe that's their national service.
Yeah, I think it's appalling what happened to our children over the last few years. I think in terms of not going to school, wearing masks in school, incarcerated in their own homes, not being able to see many of their family, certainly their friends. I think it was appalling. So it's a bit rich for the government to say this. But taking a step back from the government, I do think there is something in this for our 16-year-olds and above to integrate with local communities, as long as it's connected into services that require public services, community schemes, and ideally a pipeline into employment as well, through maybe sponsorship schemes and so on. There is various things that she suggested that are out there, but I think if there's a drive for more of our 16 and above to actually integrate through community initiatives, public sector, potential employment, that has to be a good thing. But it's a bit rich for the government to actually suggest that our youth should be doing this, and it would improve their lifestyle, their well-being, their mental health, considering what our own government have done to our youth over the last few years.
Well, last week we had Nick Gibb, the schools minister. He's actually quite a decent man, saying that there should be, we can't be keeping young people off school simply for having a cold or a cough. They should be back in school. I sort of thought, hold on a second. I refer you to the Nick Gibb who was the schools minister when schools were locked down, when you were saying that COVID meant that schools were locked down and people were at home. I mean, I know we're slightly going off on a tangent here, James, but in terms of saying, oh, we really want to improve your mental health, we really want to improve your skills, well, locking down schools was something that did not do any of that.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point, is who's coming from. I think the idea, if it was implemented properly, and I have doubts if the government involved that they'd implement this properly anyway, based on the track record of everything else, the country is falling apart on so many different levels, and again, what we're having is a government, this is another example, basically almost gaslighting a population, saying, we're going to fix this, we're going to make it better, we're going to improve every situation of public service, whatever it might be. But they are the instigators of the demise. And it's the same with this actual issue. Okay. What they did with our kids over the last 3 years, in particular through the lockdown period, was absolutely appalling. I would suggest it was actually the most grotesque aspect of the entire COVID response. But to answer the other part of this, there is something in this that if we can get a system whereby our 16-year-olds and above are integrating through employment structures and community initiatives, that if it's done right, has to be a good thing.
Okay, Professor Ashok Kumar, you've waited very, very patiently for your say. James and I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. Apologies for that. What do you think of the idea of a form of national service?
Look, I think that I agree with a lot of what James said, but I wouldn't say it was just COVID. I think it's and the lockdowns. I think it's a much larger issue than that, because you see astronomical deaths. Really, we haven't seen young people's deaths at this level. You have a labor market that's completely hollowed out. I mean, it hasn't been like this for the industrial era. The industrial capitalist era. You have this sort of higher education is near unattainable without mortgage-style debts. Property markets, again, locked out for young people. Rental markets are uncapped and unregulated. I mean, that unmooring and that hopelessness is tied to economic issues. And I think that this is a real lesson in how distractions are created. Policy and public discourse is manufactured by some, shadowy think tank.
I wouldn't say onward is shadowy. I'd say it's fairly straight out there. But
no, but we don't. I don't know who's funding them, right? So it's like it could be dark money. Who knows? And then it becomes part of the public agenda because one of their peons wrote an article. And so it's like national service is tied in with a lot of culture war things, like bringing back hanging, which they suggested 2 weeks ago, or woke police officers. I don't
think they're really linked in that way. Now, come on.
No, Peter. Let me finish. So that this is a part of an actual politics of distraction when hospitals and schools are collapsing, when a woman just died in a sewage-filled sea yesterday. We have 4 million children who are malnourished every day in this country, 800,000 people visiting food banks, 40% more than last year. There are real economic issues. You disagree, Peter, and that's fine. We disagree.
No, I'm not even saying I disagree. Ashok, just listen. For me,
this is clearly a distraction.
Just listen a second.
And the media, like circus, promoting this is part of the problem.
Okay, just listen a second. I mean, with the greatest of respect, you're taking part of the debate, which is great. But we're talking about all sorts of other things. We're talking about failing schools. We're talking about the concrete issue later in the programme. We do that right. We talk about every single issue that you've talked about. We just happen to be talking about this today. It's interesting, I think, and I think there is actually a wider problem in our society, and maybe national service, or maybe some version of this, is maybe not a bad idea to think about, because we've just had the A-level results. We've just had this huge drive. Tony Blair said that he wanted 50% of students to go to university, which I think was outrageous and ridiculous. We've got people spending a huge amount of money. As I think, Ashok, I think we probably agree on this, actually. We've got young people spend, £50,000, £60,000 worth in debt for a degree that they may not have actually needed 10 or 15 years ago to get the job. It's just that everybody now does a degree, and therefore you need a degree to get the job. And actually, there are lots of young people who are thinking, actually, no, I don't want to go to university. I don't want to do what the traditional route is. Maybe I want to get an apprenticeship, or maybe I want to go straight into work or do something different when I'm 16. So, I mean, just bringing it back to the issue, and I totally accept that all the issues you say are issues, Ashok, no doubt about that. But on the issue itself of an idea of national service or some sort of training for life, don't you think there's sort of something in this, and that we need to reevaluate how we view what 16 and 18-year-olds do in our society?
No, not really. I think it's pure culture war politics. It's kind of red meat for Middle England boomers who live in a fantasy that they went through national service, which they absolutely did not. And so they're like, this is a way to really get those woke teens on their phones in the line. I mean, it's pure red meat politics. And that's what the government's doing. And that's what's quite cynical about it. If we really wanted to give young people, make them less unmoored and more hopeful, we'd have free higher education, we'd have rent controls, we'd give people more opportunities in the workplace, we'd increase wages so it was a livable wage. We'd help people out on their debt. We have the lowest growth in the G20 in the last 20 years, and it's affecting young people who have no access to assets.
I'm sure, Ashok, that a socialist paradise would be absolutely the answer.
This isn't socialist, it's a social democratic one. This was the social contract
how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for your vision of a society?
I'll tell you how we pay for it. We could get $16 billion by just switching from capital. We equalize capital gains and income tax, which we don't do right now. That's a windfall profit for the rich. And also, you get 76% increase in profits since COVID happened for the S&P 500. We tax those profits. There are profits in society that we can tax. Huge amounts of profits that we could tax, and we are not doing that right now.
We've gone off in a lot of different directions.
Well, you asked the question, then Peter, if you don't want the answer, then you shouldn't ask the question.
I wanted the answer.
I gave you an answer. You didn't like the answer, so now you're saying we've gone off topic.
Ashok, just hold on a second. All I'm saying is you answered the question. Thank you for doing so. Really appreciate your contribution to the debate. It's not over yet. I'm going to come back to you. But all I'm saying, it's just an observation. We've gone off in a lot of directions in this conversation. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But what I want to do is go back to James Melville and come back to this particular issue of national service. From your perspective, James, and from the perspective of people listening to this, we're getting a lot of calls, texts and tweets about this. And of course, national service, there isn't really anybody who has done traditional national service who isn't over 70 or further beyond that since it was in this country previously. The whole idea of national service is something that perhaps we romanticise. Maybe this is a distraction. Maybe this is just a culture war issue, as Ashok says. What do you think?
I think the phrasing of it is wrong. I mean, the phrase of national service does give the connotations of what happened in the past. You know, certainly should be going back to sort of duty in the military, full stop. That's not the model here, but it does give off that sort of impression. I think this point that's been touched on, I think we need to look, like on all issues, about the problem in the round and then tie it up into root and branch solutions. On every single issue in this country, the major ones, whether it's to do with kids, whether it's to do with hospitals, NHS, whether it's to do with crime, every single issue, we've got governments that aren't doing legacy policies. And instead, all they're doing is throwing out management speak and sort of waffly ideas to try and sort of provoke a debate, or, you know, it's almost like a dog whistle in certain topics. But what we need is governments to be like governments and serve the people and come up with the right solutions.
It sounds almost as if you're agreeing with Ashok Kumar. Ashok,
partially, not all the points that he raised, but I do think there needs to be a debate about the structures for our youth in this country, and this aspect should be part of that debate.
Maybe not the socialist paradise. Professor Kumar, a final word from you.
Well, look at the polls that have just come out of Ireland. You have Sinn Féin that's got 30-plus potential win in the next Irish elections, and they're running on bread and butter issues. This is
as well as apologising for terrorism.
Well, this is in the south, not in the north. But
yeah, they're apologising for the terrorism that happened in the south and the north. Yeah, that's what they're doing.
Fine, but that has nothing. It's a polling. People don't really care that much about that. The thing that they care about is that they're running on bread and butter issues like rent controls and building council housing, and those are the issues that are going to win. If you're a politician in this country, you're either doing those kinds of issues or you're doing distractions. And I think right now, neither party is proposing anything that's actually going to affect people. You know, 80% of the public wants to renationalize rail. You know, huge proportions of the population wants to improve people's lives economically. Those are just not being addressed. And instead, we're getting these distractions. And
thank you both very much. But what I would say, Ashok, that probably the victims and injured of the IRA's campaign probably do care about it, both in the south and in the north of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, I should say, and in the Republic of Ireland. James Melville is a political commentator. Professor Ashok Kumar is a professor of political economy at Birkbeck University. Thank you to both men for their contributions. I know you want to get in on this as well. Dean has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Dean, I think you're an ex-soldier, is that right? Hello, Dean, are you with me? Apparently he isn't. Well, we'll try and get Dean back there. The line didn't work, but Anthony in Yorkshire has texted me to say, good afternoon. Oh no, that's on working from home. We'll come back to that. Peter, I am a 70-year-old and I just missed national service, but I did a 28-day outward bound course in Wales, which gave me a good start in life. Jason says national service, good idea, as long as wokeism doesn't creep into it like it has in everything else. And Jane says, Peter, perhaps some sort of national service is a good idea, teaching discipline where kids have lost their way, and education on things like knife crime and everyday life skills. Jane, I think that's a really good point, but at the same time I do wonder whether the lack of those sorts of skills in our education system at the moment will really be remediated, will really be solved within a 2-week course. But maybe it should be more than 2 weeks. Maybe it should be something completely different. Dean, I think we've got you back.
Hi, yes, you have. Hi, how are you?
Brilliant. Yes, great to have you clearly on the line. I think you're a former soldier, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I was in the army for 20 years.
Okay, and what do you think about the idea of national service? I mean, this isn't...
I think national service would be a brilliant idea for this country's youth.
Dean, I'm going to be honest. If I was forced to do national service when or given the option of doing national service when I was 16 or 18, I'm terrible at outdoorsy things. I'm really bad at sports. I was very unfit at that stage, and the idea of being in the army would kind of horrify me. Do you think people should be forced into it, or should they be given other opportunities to do other things, like they do in Germany, for example, where you can, work in a care home or help out in the community?
Yes, I agree with that. But the thing is, most youths these days do absolutely nothing but rather than terrorise older people and do and just hang around streets. I think it'd be brilliant for them. With myself, it was either me, join the army when I was young, or sell drugs. I chose to join the army instead of being one of those youths. I've ended 20 years, had a brilliant career. I left the army 3 years ago, and with my tradable skills from the army, I'm now a fuel tanker driver, earning 50 plus a year.
Fantastic! My goodness, maybe I should go into that. That is really good, and you are a really good advertisement for the army. And I really admire people who go into our armed services, go into the services, and you're somebody who's done that. So, I mean, at what point did you sort of say? I mean, how did you get into the army? Were you just sort of saying this is my choice, or were you recruited? Were you listened to?
No.
What happened?
Yeah. So what happened? So when I was young, in the late 90s, basically an army soldier came to the school and said, in my high school, and said, "Oh, you should join the army," and reasons why we should join the army. And he looked really smart, and I thought, "Oh, that's wicked." And when I was joining up, all my friends went into drugs, and I said, "I'm not going that way." So then I told my family, "I'm going into the army," and I did, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was the best job I've ever had in my entire life.
Brilliant. So even a taster of that, even a little bit of that through something like National Service, you'd highly recommend.
Yeah. Do a minute. I guarantee you, once they go into the service, they won't want to leave because they have so much time off. It's so much fun. They get to go all over the world on holidays, and you get your summer holidays and Christmas holidays, a full month off, all paid. You get.
Sounds as if you're sort of sad you left, actually.
Yeah, I am sad I left, but it was my time.
Yeah,
my family.
yeah.
I was based in Germany for 20 years. That's where I lived, in Germany with the British Army.
Excellent. Well, listen, thank you very, very much indeed for that, Dean. Great advertisement for the Army. One more. Tanya in London says, "Hi, Peter. We had a combined cadet force at the boarding school I went to. Absolutely brilliant. Instilled discipline, national pride, was a form of exercise, taught rifle safety and more. Bring back national service," says Tanya. We're going to get more on this and find out what you think as well. Calls, texts and tweets coming into this building will be read, phones will be answered, and people will be on the air just after the break here on talkTV.
Good evening, I'm Piers Morgan, uncensored in New York City.
Yeah.
King Piers and King Q.
I think it's only room for one king, man. You know what I'm saying?
He's mocked your weight, Trump.
Yeah, look at him. Fail. Stop working.
Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk.
Do you believe you can win this war?
You're making me cry again.
They're trying to force you out.
Yes, I feel betrayed.
Keep it award-winning. Mwah.
Lucy Letby will die behind bars.
And a senior doctor who first raised concerns about Letby wants NHS managers to be regulated.
We needed answers a lot sooner. This is, 7 years down the line? I mean, it's completely ludicrous.
We need accountability, we need performance in all walks of life.
If this nurse had misgendered somebody on a ward, she'd have been out the door.
When they first got together, there were press stories, weighty Katie.
That would make her a better Princess of Wales.
Ghislaine Maxwell agreed to be interviewed for the very first time.
I honestly wish I'd never met him.
Donald Trump has just said he expects to be arrested at 7:30 p.m.
The Conservative Party can certainly win the next election.
Can we?
Yes.
Labour are 29 points ahead in the polls. Can we? Did he say, yes, I have taken drugs and they bent the rules, or lied on the visa application form and therefore got it?
There needs to be an intervention around abortion laws.
Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can determine these things.
The rest of the world has watched on in sort of mounting horror as this story has unravelled. For you, it was incredibly personal.
The death toll from the Titanic tragedy has risen to 1,522, and may God rest their souls.
Let it roll.
If we stop producing oil, the knock-on effect is far larger than just CO2.
I nearly have empathy when I'm speaking to them. I know now, you're probably going to boot me off the show after saying this now. Meghan Markle. Some of them, they're easily led.
You can kiss my American ass.
Thank you very much. Very nice of you.
Twitter, you sons of... Can you please reinstate my account?
Yeah,
Thank you.
There's a threat that you'd be worried about.
So are you saying that you're being overwhelmed, that you're inundated? We are really working hard for you, and we're just asking patients to be patient with us.
We're now in Barbie world. You weren't asked to give evidence to the grand jury.
I'm the only one that has been telling the truth.
You don't drink, never taken drugs. You're stinking rich. Should we be concerned, Prime Minister?
If it's on your mind, it's on talkTV.
Is about you and your opinions.
If you're thinking about it,
We're talking about it.
It's all about me. That's a joke.
Thank you so much for your company this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm here for the next few weeks as well, between 1 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Great to have you listening or watching, whether you're watching on talkTV, listening on Talk Radio. And remember, if you are watching on talkTV and you're heading out maybe to the shops later on, or you're going out for a cup of tea or meet a friend or something, and you're going out in the car, be sure to switch on the radio in the car, and let's stay connected. Kenny from Edinburgh has been in touch on text on working from home, which is our next debate. He says, "Hi Cardi P, I don't think there is any real argument for people not to return to their offices. Their bosses pay their wages, so it's not unreasonable asking them to be seen to do their work. It sounds pessimistic, but the bosses can't know if their staff are actually working their full hours at home. With modern phones, emails and such can be sent if you're sitting in the pub, so I should be made to go back into the office." Well, we'll get to that in just a second, but first of all, I want to talk to Anne in West Sussex about national service. Anne, you're very good to give me a call on 0344 499 1000. What do you make of this idea put forward that 16-year-olds should do some form of national service? Maybe not quite going into the army, although that may well be an option. What do you make of it, Anne?
Can I give you 3 points? One, my husband served national service like many older men did, and it got boys like him, young men, out of perhaps a very limited environment into a totally new one.
Yes.
And he learnt new skills, and I know that during that time they wanted him to stay on because he got a brain. And like many people in this country over many years, and my own children and grandchildren, they've gone through school and their talents have not been recognised, or they haven't always been well educated. So I see a form of national service as giving young people another opportunity.
Yeah.
If they are in a city, it gets young people out. It's the quality of what we provide.
Yes.
That's important.
Yes.
If it's just a couple of weeks, a scheme near where you live, forget it.
It's not going to make a huge difference. And have you told us all your points, or what are your second and third points, Anne?
Yeah, well, quickly, if you took them away to a whole new environment, it could give them a chance to see things they hadn't seen and experienced before. The other one is the most important one, and I have talked to Mims Davis, who as an MP is dealing with all this, is psychometric testing. I had a son totally broken, left school with nothing, and it was offered by East Sussex some years back. He went through that, and they said, you can't work, you've got to read science. So he's now a doctor.
Wow,
I wanted that opportunity for all young people.
Yeah, it is incredible what psychometric testing has done. I had it done as well. It said I should go into a profession where I had to think and talk. I mean, there's definitely talking. I'm not sure about the thinking, Anne. And what's your final point, Anne?
Well, I think I come back to that it has got to be a well-run, well-thought-out scheme. And please, it's not all about war. It's about how we live with peace, how we develop opportunities that young people haven't had before. But as a country, we know the world is very difficult. We may need to look at military training.
You must be very proud of your son, Anne.
Oh, I am, because my husband and I weren't educated. I left school. I was in care. But what it made me is, I'd love your job, you see. What it made me is look at why people fail, what poverty does to people.
Well, I think, Anne, from everything you've said to me, and I know you've been on the programme before as a caller as well, from everything you've said to me, it sounds as if you have taken perhaps not the most formal education, but you're an inquisitive, curious, interested person who knows a lot of things and has had lifelong learning, which is what we all need, isn't it?
We need older people's voices.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had them on the show today, and we'll happily have you again, Anne. Thank you for your thoughts. Lots of people getting in touch with this, but I want to talk about working from home now. And an interesting one, actually, from Anthony in Yorkshire here on text. He says, "Good afternoon, Peter. I left my job in the civil service due to working from home. It destroyed working relationships and trust among co-workers as factions formed who would only communicate with each other via Zoom, excluding others, a terrible working environment which weak management allowed to fester, making it a terrible place to work. Well, actually, we've had the head of Zoom himself has said that he wants his workers to come back to work. Zoom itself, as I was saying to Richard Tice earlier, couldn't actually afford the domain name Zoom.com when they started because it was such a small startup organisation, and now it's this, tens of billions of pounds, an idea whose time came. Certainly, it was around for a long time, but an idea whose time came through COVID and through the lockdowns on so many people. Well, joining us via Zoom is in fact Dr. Mansur Sumro, who is Innovation Lead at the Future of Work Research Centre. He is essentially working from home via Zoom today in this interview. And here in the studio, who has turned up today is Professor James Woodhousen, who is Visiting Professor at South Bank University. Dr. Sumro, perhaps I could start with you. I hope you don't mind my little jibe about you working from home. I believe you're in the north of England somewhere, so I wouldn't have expected you to be in the studio, so don't worry. But what do you think the arguments for continuing to work from home are? Because things have really changed, haven't they? Oh, we can't hear him. There he is.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. All right, so in terms of whether people should be allowed to work from home, so just a bit of abbreviations here. We use the term WFH, which is work from home, during the time of pandemic because there was no choice, and then we moved on to that. It was successful. That's why there was another term that came in, WFA, which was work from anywhere, which is that as long as results are being produced, employers said that to a great extent we're fine wherever you are.
But the point is, though, James Woodhousen, isn't it, that productivity is a real problem, and actually maybe people in those offices together, if you're in fact an office worker, and lots of people couldn't ever work from home during the pandemic, maybe actually you can learn from other people and you can actually have a sort of a spirit of corps being in the same office together. What do you think?
Well, I think that's true. I think the much more worrying problem, and it relates to your earlier discussion on national service, is the decline of the work ethic in this country, in America and elsewhere. And when you've got millions of calls being unanswered by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs...
Tell me about it. I was on hold with them the other day for nearly an hour.
Well, 80% of them work from home. And that tells us something about weak productivity if all these calls are not being answered. It also tells us that quite a lot of people, young people as well as old, don't want to work anymore. And I think the whole idea of work-life balance is a mistake.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're in a situation, Dr. Sumro, where the balance has come in favour of the worker. It has shifted in that we have, I think it's 1.3 million job vacancies in this country. There are lots of people, I know employers, I've talked to some friends who are employers, who will have people come to them and say, well, I won't even apply for that job if it isn't 3 days a week working from home. The balance has shifted, hasn't it? And the world of work has changed, hasn't it, Dr. Sumro?
Yes, so I think we're looking at very disruptive work patterns now. So if I look at the data, if we are trying to analyze job listings, and we saw that hybrid jobs have gone up by 11% this year alone from January. If you look at the data from CIPD, they mentioned that around 2 million people have switched their jobs in the last year, primarily because employer was giving a flexible option and they moved on with it. Likewise, when we look at the multinationals, half of the multinationals are planning to cut down their offices in the next 3 years. So if we look at how we are moving forward, number one, buildings are empty now. So if you look at corporate real estate around the world, especially in New York and London, so a lot of corporate lease, the buildings are empty. Number two...
Is that progress?
Progress depends on how we define it, right? So the question goes back in terms of business revenue, sales, productivity. If those things are sorted, then I think employers and employees, because overall working from home is good for employees, employers, as well as society. And when I say employees, when I say employees, it's about no commute, flexible in terms of work, so better autonomy in terms of this, fewer meetings. When it comes to employers, certainly it's the big chunk is the office.
We'll come back to you in a second, Dr. Sumro, but Professor Woodhousen is chomping at the bit to get in here.
Well, fewer meetings. I don't know whether the learned doctor has heard of Zoom, but everybody knows that you're in back-to-back meetings with Zoom. And the correspondent who phoned in to say all the factionalism that had broken out in the civil service when people worked from home, it atomizes the workforce. It's not just that young people can't have water cooler moments of learning. It's the fact that there's no solidarity with working from home. There's extra hours that you save from commuting. That's not higher productivity. That's more work. There's also a great problem in this country, which is that more and more people are declaring long-term sick. 2.6 million at the moment. Now, why are they doing that? Because many people have told them that the office is a toxic environment, and therefore they declare that they feel mentally ill, they go home, and they get more mentally ill. So working from home doesn't help either the employee or the employer. Now, I'm not in favour of employer fiat. I don't agree with Citigroup cutting people's bonuses to get them back in the office, but nobody can persuade me that working from home is the way to deal with an emergency. And there are more and more emergencies in business at the moment. If you remember the evacuation of Kabul, the Foreign Office was mostly on holiday and working from home. Is that the way we want to go? Is that what we mean by high productivity?
He's got a point, Dr. Sumru, doesn't he, in terms of the fact that you just miss out on so many different conversations. It's not just those water cooler moments. It's the kind of conversations that help people. I remember in one of my first jobs as a reporter, I sat opposite the station's political editor. I just happened to be, that was just the desk that I was given. And I learned so much from him, just talking, listening to him, seeing how he operated, witnessing people working in the office. I think particularly about young people just not getting that kind of experience, but also when there's a crisis it can be difficult to deal with it because you're not physically there, and those kind of little conversations aren't kind of had.
Absolutely. So I mean there is a tug of war and tension between employers and employees around this. But one thing moving forward with what we see is that 5 days work in office, that concept I think to a great extent is dead. So
but should it be dead? Should people be forced back, do you think? Or should they? Is this just the way it happens? What do you think?
That's a good point. I mean, bosses,
what do you think?
I think that, in terms of the excitement, bosses need to take time to consider why employees are not excited to come back to work. That needs to be addressed. I think that's the root cause. So free lunch and free gym at office, I think those are not the reasons to invite employees to come back to work and force them to work. Secondly, as a change management consultant in terms of management research, as Professor was mentioning, we've always seen that there will be resentment when you ask about a change. So people have adjusted to working from home or working from anywhere. So now this return to office or return to past RTP U-turn, this has to be treaded with, with caution. So I'm not in favor of full-time remote work, but what I'm saying is that hybrid work is the future, and companies should be open towards it.
Okay, Professor Woodhouse, a final word from you, because you actually, for people watching on talkTV, you will have seen him sort of slightly holding his head in his hands there when Professor Sumru said about gyms and free food and so on. I mean, the fact is, though, Dr. Sumru is right, is he not, in that the balance between the employer and the employee has changed, and the employees have a bit more power. No, you're shaking your head.
No, I don't agree. It's all pioneered by McKinsey of fond memory. The idea that we face a war for talent, that workers have the upper hand.
1.3 million job vacancies now.
Yeah, but if you look at what they're paid, if you look at housing costs, if you look at cost of living, to suggest that they've got the upper hand is just ridiculous. To suggest that beer and sandwiches in the office will bring people back.
I'd love beer and sandwiches.
I'm sure you don't do it while you work, Peter. But the reason we need to go back to the office is not because the employers tell us to do that. It's because it's how you contribute to society. It's how you contribute to solidarity. It's where you learn things, as was your personal experience. There are all these merits of work, despite the toxic reputation that the office has. We've lost that. We don't want to rub shoulders with each other as much as we did and learn from each other and progress and contribute to the wealth of society. That's a great mistake, and we've got to put an end to it. We've got to get the kind of social approval of our peers back on the agenda for the contribution that we make. In the old days, it wasn't cool to be working at home or malingering or unemployed or any of those things, because the community would say, well, what are you doing? We need to get that spirit back.
Quick final word from Dr. Mansur Sumru, please, on what you've heard today.
Yes, I agree with it in part, but the point is that the notion around working from home and then return to office, the main notion that is being presented is presenteeism. And what we see is that it's more about purposeful presence rather than passive attendance and, card swiping and, protocols around attendance. What we fear is that with employers forcing the return to work, we're talking more about presenteeism. We want to see whether you're there. So I think that's not where we are heading in terms of digital economy, gig economy, and the future of work.
Thank you both very, very much indeed. Dr. Mansur Sumru, who is the Innovation Lead at the Future of Work Research Centre, somewhat aptly joining us by Zoom, and Professor James Woodhousen, Visiting Professor at South Bank University, who is rather aptly in the studio here. Loads of people getting in touch about this, including Nick, who says working from home has had a detrimental effect on this country. You can't get through to call centres. Agree. Although you can get through to talkTV if you give us a ring, 0344 499 1000. You can't get through to call centres. Nothing works efficiently, and it's made people complacent. Why would you go into the office when you can sit in your garden in your PJs drinking wine with no one to check what you're up to? My goodness. Another texter says work from home should be balanced and not ruled out completely. It has some benefits, including being anti-inflationary. It reduces emissions and could possibly help towards achieving net zero. James Woodhousen is scoffing at that. It reduces congestion and peak travel times, and given the trains are always on strike, the option of work from home is a joy. The transport implications of work from home is a whole other debate, but it's a very good point made here in that. I recognise some professions can't work from home, and perhaps they should get a premium for doing so, some sort of tax break. Please be balanced in your discussion about this. Well, I think we have been, and we've read out your message. Loads more on this coming, including a couple of calls on this we will take in just a few minutes here on talkTV. Well, lots of people getting in touch on this, including Jim in the Isle of Wight. 0344 499 1000 is the number he's called. Jim, you're very welcome to the programme this afternoon. What would you like to say?
Well, you're talking about this working from home.
Yeah.
The people like income tax, DVLA, road tax, this sort of business, they're all working from home, as it appears, and you cannot get them on the telephone.
Yeah.
You have to write to them. It takes forever to get a reply. Quite often the reply is inaccurate because wherever
I've been there, Jim. I've been there.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. I've also been told, I don't know if it's fact, but they're not sending out reminders now for renewal of driving licence or road tax.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting. I know some people have had road tax reminders, so maybe it's just the area you're in or something. But there is
May well be, but it still comes down to the same thing.
You're absolutely right, Jim. There's a big issue in this.
Yeah. Also, you've got people who are supposed to be office workers in London. This affects other businesses because those people working in London used to use, coffee shops and sandwich bars and stuff. So.
Well, we were talking earlier about commercial property and the fact that I'm not going to cry too many tears for commercial property people, but I know what you mean, Jim.
Yeah, and they were getting London waiting allowance, which I think is about 6,000 a year now.
It depends on your job, but you're absolutely right about London waiting. That's another thing. Yeah,
a lot of these people now have moved out of London.
Yeah.
Because they can work from home, which has affected property prices in other areas because now there's a shortage of houses, so the prices have gone up. They're sitting there hundreds of miles away from where they're supposed to work, and now to get them to go back to the office, they can't really uproot and move back to where they did live, we're say in the London area.
Yeah.
So you have a problem there. Now, going on to the people actually working from home and their continuity of work, the lost comradeship from working in a group, ongoing training on modules, for example.
No, you're absolutely right, Jim. There's a heck of a lot in this, and thank you for your call. Lots of people getting in touch about that. Mick says, due to civil servants working from home, I'm still waiting after 10 months for a simple probate due to the death of my wife. Well, Mick, I'm sorry to hear your wife died. It is impossible to contact anyone, and it is getting financially difficult. Nobody cares. Well, Mick, I think a lot of people listening will care, but it will feel that way when you're dealing and banging your head against a brick wall in terms of really straightforward legal things like probate that should just be straightforward, and they're not. Lots of people getting in touch on national service. George says, national service versus university. Basically, anyone can go to university, even if they're not particularly academically minded. The result is a poor degree and loads of debt. National service promotes self-reliance, transferable skills and a wage. Society benefits. University with the resulting debt means a compliant generation that benefits those in charge. I know what makes sense to me. Well, George, I was really lucky. I went to a really good university, and I loved university, and it was right for me. It was the right thing for me, and I had loads of really good opportunities. And I'm not going to say university is a bad thing, but I will say that I agree with you in that we need to think in different ways about this. Simply saying, you've got to get brilliant A-levels because you've got to go to university. Why? Why have you got to do that? What about apprenticeships? What about going into the world of work? What about a hybrid where you do a few days a week with a business and then the business maybe pays for a bit of your course? There are loads of those kind of options, because saddling yourself with £50,000-60,000 worth of debt when you're 18 years old, it's got to be worth it. There's got to be an end to it. There's got to be you shouldn't have to be paying it off until you're retired. Sean says, good afternoon, Peter. Back in my youth here in England, youngsters were involved in Boy Scouts and Brownies, Girl Scouts. These can be brought back for the youth, get them involved in positive activities. I think Scouts and Brownies do still exist, but and there's always, from what I hear from friends of mine who are parents, there are often pressure to get more groups like that done. A lot of dedication, and volunteers do great work in those organisations. I was part of the Boys Brigade, which, to be brutally honest, I didn't really enjoy. I'd probably be better in the Scouts, but those kind of organisations do a great job, and actually the people who ran the BB did a great job. It just wasn't quite for me. Sue says, as kids we used to have Saturday jobs from the age of about 14. Why don't kids do this today? I had a job when I was 13. I delivered newspapers when I was 13 for I promise you, £8 a week. I did 6 days delivering 30 newspapers and at £8 a week. I'll start talking about how I did a walk through the snow in my bare feet to get to school in a minute. Anyway, Carol says we're yet again barking up the wrong tree. Not 16 plus for national service is needed. That's masking unemployment. Put the criminals to do it. Teach them lessons because prison isn't. Better still, let's have boot camps. One other tweeter says national service would be hugely beneficial to society. Still works well for the Swiss and many others. And Rinky Dick says a brainwave, putting Peter Cardwell on at 1 o'clock on a Sunday. Super in capital letters. Well, thank you very much indeed. I want to talk now to Stephen James, who is an award-winning teacher, because this absolute nightmare, front page of the Sunday People today, 70,000 more schools at risk of closure. Desperate scramble to check crumbling concrete is affecting an ongoing story. It's not going to go away anytime soon. It is affecting schools, hospitals, courts. There's so much going on here. Let's talk to Stephen now. Stephen James, award-winning teacher. Great to have you on the programme. Stephen, what do you make of this? It's a total shambles, isn't it?
Hello, Peter. Yeah, I mean, look, this has been going on since the 90s, possibly even longer, and it's something that's been continually kicked down the road. And look, I think firstly we've got to recognise that the government did act quick when the report came through. And
shouldn't they have known it was coming?
I think with a lot of things, as always, and through life, we mitigate risk. And this has been something that's been identified in hospitals, and they've been reinforcing hospitals. And it's something we can do in the wider infrastructure of our country as well. But when it starts coming to the stage where lives are at risk, I think they have to be commended for acting quickly. Now, obviously, the knock-on effect to that is the potentially damaging children's education yet again with missing school hours. And look, I think if COVID has taught us anything, is that children are resilient. They get through these things.
Are they? I mean, some of them are. Some of them are very resilient, and some of them got through it okay. But I know lots of young people and children of friends of mine who their development has been set back, their work ethic is different, their interaction with other children is different, their development, their mental health. I mean, there's so much of this that I don't think we even know now in terms of lockdown, and I know that's a separate discussion. But we had the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, saying only this week, before this kind of emerged as a story, that even if they have a cough or cold, they should go into school because absenteeism is a really big thing. But schools were locked down and closed for such a long time, and now because of something that was anticipatable, that was coming down the track, many schools are closing again.
And I think you've piled a lot of issues into that kind of one statement there in terms of children's resilience. I do think they're resilient, and I do think they'll always bounce back. There are obviously outliers and there are issues, but in terms of the school real estate and making sure that children are able to get into school, and absenteeism is high, not just combined with children just not turning up. Also, homeschooling has increased as well. So parents are choosing to keep their children at home as well. I think what do you think of homeschooling? I think it's the parents' absolute right to teach their children if they want to teach their children. It's not the state's role to kind of step in and tell them how things should be, how they should bring their family up. However, I do think, and I'm always going to say, having a qualified teacher in front of a child is always going to be far more effective than having anybody in front of a child or just doing it yourself. But the kind of creativity we need to think about in our education system that this is kind of going to push out in terms of remote learning, is that kind of being put in place right now for schools whose children are going to be off for an extended period? Are they looking at parts of the school which they can open and opening, areas of the school and operating out of those, and just closing the classrooms which are at risk? Are they reaching out to local businesses? We're always talking about, everyone working from home nowadays. There might be a building next door, which is completely empty, that they could say, look, come on, we've got a bit of a problem. Can you help us out? Can you be community spirited? We're all about that kind of social corporate responsibility.
I get that, but how sustainable is that? I mean, that you might have a business that would say, okay, yeah, for a month, but if these buildings have to be rebuilt, I mean, that's going to take a long time and a lot of money.
You're right. It's not sustainable, but I would always encourage finding solutions to problems rather than problems to solutions. And, we deal with what's in front of us. And ultimately, the safety of the children is paramount, and we can't have children in schools which aren't safe. Same as we can't have patients in hospitals which aren't safe as well. And, we need to, I think, start kind of pulling together in this. There's no, I've already spotted over the weekend, this kind of political point scoring already trying to happen. And
it's perfectly legitimate. I'm sorry, Stephen. It's perfectly legitimate for opposition parties to say this is a failure and you should have seen it coming.
And you could say, why didn't the Labour Party see it coming? Because it happened on their watch as well. So, you're going to get this constant back and forth, and it doesn't take us forward. He said, she said, all this nonsense is not the kind of helpful politics that we need at this moment. We need a positive, we need firm action by the Secretary of State, which we've seen, to close those schools. We need our leaders in schools, head teachers, to say, right, we've got this problem. How can we creatively kind of solve it together? You've got a school of 1,000 children. They've all got parents. Let's reach out to the school community. Let's work together. Let's find solutions instead of constantly saying, right, we're all in the wrong. We're all, really kind of, we need to hold our hands up on issue, but nobody actually taking responsibility. And this is the thing that kind of, winds me up quite a little bit with the state of education. It's used as a political football when it shouldn't be, especially an issue like safeguarding and keeping children, safe and not wanting ceilings to collapse on them.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts there, Stephen James, who is an award-winning teacher. I think there is going to be some blaming of the government in just a few minutes here on talkTV, because Andrew Gwynn is the Shadow Public Health Minister. He's going to talk about cancer, he's going to talk about schools, he's going to talk about concrete, and he's going to talk about a few other things as well. We're going to have a wide-ranging interview with him. If you want to get me to put questions to him, send them to me now. Stay with us here on talkTV for that interview in just a few minutes.
This is talkTV.
Lively debate, intelligent conversation. Join me, Dr. David Bull, on talkTV every week.
Good evening, I'm Piers Morgan, uncensored in New York City.
Yeah.
King Piers and King Q.
I think it's only room for one king, man. You know what I'm saying?
He's mocked your weight, Trump.
Yeah, look at him. Fail. Not working.
Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk.
Do you believe you can win this war?
He's making me cry again.
They're trying to force you out. Yes, I feel betrayed. Keep it award-winning. Mwah.
Lucy Letby will die behind bars.
And a senior doctor who first raised concerns about Letby wants NHS managers to be regulated.
We needed answers a lot sooner. This is, 7 years down the line? I mean, it's completely ludicrous.
We need accountability, we need performance in all walks of life.
If this nurse had misgendered somebody on a ward, she'd have been out the door.
When they first got together, there were press stories. Weighty Katie.
That would make her a better Princess of Wales.
Ghislaine Maxwell agreed to be interviewed for the very first time.
I honestly wish I'd never met him.
Donald Trump has just said he expects to be arrested at 7:30 p.m.
The Conservative Party can certainly win the next election.
Can we?
Yes.
Labour 29 points ahead in the polls. Can we?
Did he say, yes, I have taken drugs and they bent the rules, or lied on the visa application form and therefore got it?
There needs to be an intervention around abortion laws.
Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can determine these things.
The rest of the world has watched on in sort of mounting horror as this story has unravelled. For you, it was incredibly personal.
The death toll from the Titanic tragedy has risen to 1,522, and may God rest their souls.
Let it roll.
If we stop producing oil, the knock-on effect is far larger than just CO2.
I nearly have empathy when I'm speaking to them. I know now you're probably going to boot me off the show after saying this now. Meghan Markle. Some of them, they're easily led.
You can kiss my American ass. Thank you very much. Very nice of you.
Twitter, you sons of Can you please reinstate my account?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's a threat that you'd be worried about.
So are you saying that you're being overwhelmed, that you're inundated? We are really working hard for you, and we're just asking patients to be patient with us.
We're now in Barbie world. You weren't asked to give evidence to the grand jury.
I'm the only one that has been telling the truth.
You don't drink, never taken drugs. You're stinking rich. Should we be concerned?
If it's on your mind, it's on talkTV.
Is about you and your opinions.
If you're thinking about it, we're talking about it.
It's all about me. That was a joke.
Join me every day from Monday to Friday, 3 p.m. until 5 p.m. for news, views, and a mega dose of attitude. Tune in if you dare.
Well, if you've just joined us, you're very, very welcome to Talk TV. I'm Peter Cardwell here between now and 4 o'clock, and then Tricia takes over between 4 and 7. For the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be on both on Saturdays between 10 and 1, and 10 a.m. to 1 p.m, and on Sundays between 1 and 4. So it's great to be here. Thank you so much for your company, whether you're watching on Talk TV or listening on Talk Radio. There's loads to talk about. We're having a big debate about a national service re-implementation, should it happen. Also, working from home as well is a big one. We're also talking about concrete in schools, hospitals and courts. In a minute, we're going to talk to a leading Labour politician about the postcode lottery in cancer care as well. Loads of people getting in touch, including Gary, who says, "Hi Peter, not sure why people think they can't get through to all these services because people are working from home. In my experience, companies have installed virtual phone systems onto laptops so they can still have the same monitoring and reporting capabilities. Maybe there's another reason why we can't get through." Well, Gary, I don't know about you, but I've spent a long time on hold for many different organisations. I had to pay a fee to a public body of £27, and I had to ring them 15 times before I emailed them and they rang me back, and clearly there was no one there answering the phone. Nicola in Norfolk says, "My child did the National Citizenship Service programme in the summer after finishing GCSEs in 2019. It was a 4-week programme which comprised 1 week at an adventure activity centre, 1 week residential week doing life skills workshops, and 2 weeks doing voluntary work in the community. It was a good programme which only cost about £50 to take part. If it isn't still running, maybe it should be reintroduced on a mandatory basis." I think it is still running, Nicola. It's a big one. It was introduced, I think, under David Cameron. Also, Mo in Leicestershire says, "National service is a great idea, but already the bleeding hearts are making excuses against it. It would give our young people opportunities to do something instructive with their lives, as well as a sense of purpose and self-respect, all of which seems to be sadly lacking in our young people today." Well, what do you think? Let me know. 0344 499 1000. We're going to take some calls in a few minutes. Where you can also text me like these people did, 87222. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. But whatever you do, whether you get in touch or whether you don't, and I hope you do, let's spend the next couple of hours together here on talkTV. Well, there's loads going on politically this week because Parliament, after its long summer recess, is coming back for, wait for it, 2 weeks only. And then they're going off for another 4 weeks. Now, it's not a holiday. They will be going mainly to conferences. There's going to be the Labour Party conference, which is happening in Liverpool I think it's the second week of October, and the Conservative Party conference the first week of October. I'll be there for both of them, and one man who'll definitely be at Labour and definitely not at the Conservatives is Andrew Gwynn, who is the Shadow Public Health Minister, who joins me now. Andrew, you're very welcome to Talk TV. How are you this afternoon?
I'm all right, thank you, Peter. I will be in the city of Manchester, though, where obviously the Tories are going to gather for their conference, although you're quite right, I won't be in the hall.
I don't think you'd want to be, and I don't think they'd be that happy if you're there. But anyway, you'll be in Liverpool anyway, and no doubt we will bump into one another at some point. Andrew, I know you're the Shadow Public Health Minister. I want to ask you about a bit of research from Labour this week. New analysis laying bare the extent of regional inequalities in cancer treatment. More than 1 in 5 patients with cancerous tumours waiting longer than 2 months to have them removed in some parts of England. This is a real worry, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and of course it speaks to wider health inequalities across the country. But of course, cancer is something that's personal to a lot of people, either because they themselves are going through the cancer journey or they know loved ones that have or are going through that cancer journey. And it can't be right that patients in the most deprived parts of the country are more likely to have their cancer diagnosed late. That's something that we've really got to get a grip on. But then not only being diagnosed too late, they're then having lots of struggles getting into referral for that cancer treatment. And so, for example, it's something around 47% of cancer patients in the most deprived communities being diagnosed too late, compared to just 39% in the least deprived. I would argue that even that figure is far too high.
What's behind all this, Andrew? Why is it so different in so many different areas? And I mean, you will say the government is to blame, I would imagine, but why is that?
Well, of course, some of it is because getting that diagnosis is really quite difficult in some of the most deprived areas. It's not as easy to get in to see a GP. A lot of people put off going to the doctors when they have symptoms because they just think, well, I'm not going to get seen. And sometimes you just really put to one side the symptoms that you've got. But we were kind of encouraged to do that during lockdown, were we not? Which your party voted for, to say don't bother the NHS if you can avoid it. We were, but when it comes to cancer, this is something that you really have to be rigorous on, and it's why I would argue.
But in fairness, you might not know it was cancer. You might just think, oh, I feel a bit weird, or
you are best to err on the side of caution, Peter. I mean, I know from bitter experience. My mum died when I was 19 of ovarian cancer. She worked in a shop. She did a lot of heavy lifting of boxes and so on. Her first referral to a doctor was basically to say that she had back pain. The doctor didn't actually do the job that they should have done and put it down to her employment rather than getting tests done to err on the side of caution. And sadly, by the time that ovarian cancer was found, it had spread and my mum didn't survive that. So I am really quite keen, Peter, that we get people in the front door, get them tested. The earlier the diagnosis, the better. And then we get them on the pathway for treatment.
Do people need to be maybe a wee bit, maybe your experience might play into this, and I'm so sorry to hear about your mother, Andrew. Do people need to be a little bit sharp-elbowed with the NHS these days? Do they need to say, actually, no, I'm not going to accept that. I want you to test me more and do the full range of tests that you have for me?
I certainly think early diagnosis has to be a core part of what the government insists the NHS does, and it's certainly something that we have committed to in our health mission that was launched by Keir Starmer. We will have early diagnosis as a core part of our offer, but we will also be restoring the cancer treatment targets, because it can't be acceptable that the government just scraps those targets. They were there for a reason, and it was to incentivise the NHS to get people on that cancer pathway for treatment as early as possible, because we know that your chances of survival are far greater the earlier you get in there. But yes, people do have to be aware of symptoms, and they have to be prepared to challenge the medical profession and say, I want this testing because I am concerned it could be cancer. And certainly the cancer charities are very keen that there is a greater awareness of symptoms that can just easily be brushed off as lots of other stuff. But it is better to err on the side of caution, get tested. And the best news is when you're told that it isn't cancer. Yeah, but at least if you're told it is cancer, you're straight on that pathway.
Yeah. In terms of, I want to talk about NHS buildings in a minute. I know you'll have something to say on that. But, I mean, it's fascinating as well on staffing that we've had the Conservative government promising to bear down on the use of temporary staffing agencies. But we have midwives who are being paid £2,100 for a single shift. We're in, the NHS is in crisis in many ways. Staffing is one of them. There are the strikes that doctors and indeed consultants are on. What do you think should happen? How should the government fix that?
Well, we've said for a long time now, till we're blue in the face almost, that there needs to be a proper workforce plan. We need to train up the doctors, the nurses.
The government would say they have one, that they came out with one a few weeks ago.
They did, but, you know, we've been saying for the last 2 years we need to do it. We can fund it now. We've said how through scrapping the non-dom tax status. The longer this goes on, the worse it's going to be, because it's not just about ensuring we have the new staff coming through, homegrown trained staff coming through the system. We've got to retain the staff that we've got, and we're not doing either of those things. And that is really the crunch point that we're at. We will support the government in doing the right thing and getting that workforce plan sped up so that we get that staff in place. But look, these are long-term problems. There's not going to be a quick fix to this, Peter. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The next Labour government is going to have to deal with the workforce crisis that we will inherit. But at least we've got a plan, and we've got the determination to see it through so that we do have the staffing in place for an NHS that is able to cater for the nation's health needs.
What about the physical structures of the NHS? Because I know there are a number of hospitals as well as schools, as well as courts, for example. A big
emphasis on building safety. I know that you were the former Shadow Community Secretary. You will have known about Grenfell, of course, and the huge focus on building safety that has been the case for the last few years. There are real worries about this. It is, I think, a scandal, and one I think the government should have seen coming. But a lot of these buildings were built under a Labour government as well. So does Labour have a case to answer here as well, Andrew?
Well, look, I think there needs to be an urgent full audit required to find out the extent of the problem across the public estate. Most of the buildings that are affected were from the 60s, the 70s and the 80s, when this concrete was the fashionable building tool of the day. We knew that the lifespan of these buildings was not necessarily as long as for conventionally built buildings. But, you know, I think it does come back to a competence issue here, because the current government have been in office for 13 years. Michael Gove is the first to accept now that one of his earliest mistakes was scrapping building schools for the future, which was the Labour government initiative that was rebuilding the primary and the secondary sector stock. And, you know, we built a lot of new schools under the Blair-Brown years, and that came grinding to a halt in the coalition years. Michael Gove now accepts that was a wrong decision. But we are where we are. We need an urgent audit straight away so that we know the scale of the problem, and then we have to ensure that there's the resources there to put that right, because we can't have, in the case of children in schools potentially starting tomorrow, we can't have this uncertainty and the worry of parents and staff that children and teachers might be sitting in unsafe buildings. So we need to get very urgently to the bottom of this, and we need to fix it.
It's interesting that the kind of phrasing you're using in some of your answers, Andrew. You're talking about we will inherit when there's a Labour government, essentially. Look, I don't blame you, because the polls are so far ahead for the Labour government and so on, but obviously so much can change in a year. I mean, Liz Truss was the Prime Minister this time last year, and so lots can change indeed. I mean, are you 100% confident there's going to be a Labour government after whenever the 2024 election is? Because it's just interesting at the moment. We're going back into Parliament this week. There's a lot going on politically, a very busy autumn, and presumably there will be many opportunities for Labour to put their case across.
Yeah, I take nothing for granted. Look, I've been in politics now, elected politics as a Member of Parliament for 18 and a half years, and I've seen the pendulum swing one way, I've seen it swing the other. A lot, as you say, can change very quickly, but after 13 years of a Conservative government, there is a sense that Britain just isn't working at every level of the country. There is a tiredness in government, and the Labour Party has changed. We've come forward with our missions to make Britain's streets safe, to break down the barriers to opportunity at every stage, to build that NHS that is fit for the future, to make our country a clean energy superpower and to have that ambition to secure the highest sustained growth in the G7. These are exciting prospects that a Labour government can start to fix our broken country. So I'm going to be working with the shadow cabinet, with Keir Starmer at the top of the organisation to make sure we get that change that this country so desperately needs.
I might be totally wrong. I might be totally wrong in this. I might have got it totally wrong. But what I'm sensing from people I speak to up and down the country, I'm not just talking about people in London, I'm talking about people right across the country, friends in different parts of the country, in Scotland and Wales as well, is that they don't hate Rishi Sunak. They don't think he's a terrible human being. Some people hate him, but not to the same level as both the love and the hatred, the strong emotions that perhaps Boris Johnson brought out. So I would argue that Rishi Sunak is someone who most people don't feel particularly strongly about one way or the other. But politics is, whether we like it or not, about personalities a little bit. And we had a pretty cruel comment, but I think kind of funny as well, I'm sorry to say that, Andrew, when someone described, we were talking about the problems with the emissions and Sadiq Khan and the ULEZ recently, and one caller called Keir Starmer an ultra-low charisma zone. Was he right?
No, he wasn't, and I know Keir very well, and he has the determination to not only take the Labour Party into government, but to be a Prime Minister that changes this country for the better. Look, you know, you say people have views that don't extend to hatred for the Prime Minister. I don't want people to hate the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of our country is a job that everybody should aspire to. It is the greatest office of state. I have to say, in 1997, the same could have been said about John Major, and he went on to a historic drubbing. It's not necessarily about that. It's about the sense that this government has run out of ideas. It's run out of steam. It is flailing around and failing at the same time. And it is time for a change. And I think that has coincided with
sorry to interrupt you, Andrew, but is that enough that it's just time for a change? I mean, maybe I'm wrong in this, and maybe I'm living in an echo chamber or whatever, I don't know, but Labour just doesn't seem to be capturing the imagination. There doesn't seem, the polls are there, no doubt about that, and I think you're absolutely right that Labour will be the next government. But, I mean, there's time, of course. There'll be more meat on the bone, I'm sure, at Labour conference. There'll be much more policy. But if you walk down the street and stop 10 people and say, what does Labour stand for? What would Keir Starmer do differently? Are people in a position yet where they know that? Is there time for Labour to make that case? Or is this just a tennis match? Are the Conservatives just going to lose and then Labour by default win?
There's absolutely time to make that case, and as you've rightly said, at Labour conference we'll be putting a bit more flesh on the specifics of what our offer is going to look like in the run-up to a general election. But look, Peter, the point here is I don't want the Tories to lose by default. I want Labour to win, and Labour will put forward, I think, a very clear but achievable programme for government that shows that we are determined to change this country for the better, that what we have and what we will inherit is not how it should be, and you know, we are determined to make people's lives better. That is the only purpose for a government, to make people feel safe, to make people feel secure, and that people feel that they are part of a society that is working. And on all three of those things at the moment, I would argue the current government has let this country down very badly, and it is time for them to go.
OK, Andrew Gwynn, thank you very, very much indeed. Shadow Public Health Minister Andrew Gwynn speaking there. He was talking about cancer diagnosis. We were talking as well about the postcode lottery at the very start of that interview, the real problems that many people have been having, and the fact that there are so many issues around this. 1 in 5 patients with cancerous tumours waiting longer than 2 months to have them removed in some parts of England. Well, Julia has phoned me from Essex, and thanks first of all for ringing me. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Julia, I understand you had lung cancer, but it was caught very early, is that right?
Yes, I had to. The NHS are doing a free lung scan, which everybody who gets a chance must go and have it done. Now, they caught that I had cancer on both my lungs, but they caught it really early, so I've had 2 operations and I'm clear of cancer now, so please don't worry.
Excellent.
But what I will say, when you go to hospital to have a scan, whether it's on your lungs or your stomach or whatever, I don't understand why they don't scan you from head to foot.
Yeah.
Because they caught my cancer on my lungs early and it was all dealt with. But if something else was the matter with a different part of my body, then I've got to go back to the doctors, get an appointment to go to the hospital, have another scan, all this, that and the other. It takes a lot of time. If they scan you from head to toe when you first go in, if anything's the matter with any part of your body, they can pick it up.
And they would save money as well, because not only would you be in a better position knowing what's happening, the prevention better than the cure, picking things up early, dealing with it with treatments that I'm sure your early diagnosis of lung cancer, the cost to the NHS was a lot less dealing with it in the early stages than it would have been if things had, God forbid, gone on to be much more serious.
Yes, precisely. So it will save, well, most importantly, it saves people's lives. If whatever's the matter, they catch it early. But it also, if they catch if it's left, the NHS still has to deal with you.
Yeah.
So the longer it's left, the more money it costs them. So obviously, most important is saving people's lives. But it also saves the NHS a lot of money, and it won't cost them any more to scan you from head to toe instead of just the part of the body you've gone to the hospital to be concerned about.
Well, in the programme, the section of the programme we've just been talking about, Julia, we have been, certainly Andrew Gwynn has been bashing the government, saying it's not doing enough, but actually Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, certainly in regard to lung cancer, has said there's going to be a lot more screening. It's going to be available to many people. That's something that the Roy Castle Lung Cancer Foundation has been campaigning for a long time. My friend Kathy is involved with that, and they're a really, really good charity, and I'm delighted. One of my very best friends died of lung cancer a couple of years ago, Julia, and I'm delighted that you got it caught early, and I wish you good health and hope that you are 100% for a long time to come.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Julia. Really appreciate it. Good to talk to you. Lots of people getting in touch on Starmer as well. Chris in Horsham says, as long as Starmer keeps backing Can, he will lose the next election. We're going to talk about the ULEZ a little bit later on, actually. Dawn in Chelmsford says, Peter, I despair about the upcoming general election because I don't believe that a Starmer-led government will be any different to what we have now. We need a new party that cares about our country. Dawn, I think Starmer will be different. It may not be what you necessarily want it to be, but it may not be what I necessarily want it to be, but I do think it will be different. On ULEZ, actually, Ian in Wimbledon has been in touch. He says ULEZ is nothing but an assault on the working classes, and people thinking of voting Labour in the next election think very, very carefully. By the way, does ULEZ mean the current government-run MOT system isn't worth the paper it's written on, says Ian in Wimbledon. Well, that's a really interesting point, because you are tested for emissions when your car, I should say more accurately, is tested for emissions in an MOT, and you sort of say, well, if it's safe to drive in, Shropshire, why is it not safe to drive for emissions in outer London? It's a big topic. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to be talking about the junior doctors and the consultants being on strike. Will they ever stop? Will the government in any way deal with this properly? Rishi Sunak says that he is dealing with it. He's made them a pay offer and they should sit down, shut up and get back to work. What do you think? Let us know. 0344 499 1000. We'll talk about that after the break here on talkTV.
Well, the junior doctors' strikes will guarantee more NHS strike misery. Both junior doctors and consultants are going to hold 4 days of united industrial action from this month. It's going to be a crippling strike. The British Medical Association bosses announcing the coordinated walkout will take place in England over separate days in both September and, guess what, in a shocking coincidence, it'll take place at the same time as the Conservative Party conference. I wonder if that was in any way planned. I think it might have been. Junior doctors have had 19 days of strike action since March. Consultants have been out on 4 separate days. Martin Gower is a former NHS Trust Chair. Martin, you're very welcome to talkTV. Is there any way through this?
Peter, thank you for having me on, first of all. I don't know that there is a way through that would be acceptable. Having worked as a chair in the NHS until mid-2020, I suppose that the feeling I have is, firstly, the idea that the Prime Minister of the country and the Health Minister must engage with the junior doctors, well, let's get it right, with the BMA in order to stop a strike is a ludicrous suggestion. This doesn't help. This doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Not that anybody else in the world has ever copied the NHS. They don't.
And you can well ask the question, what is the point of having a body called NHS England, which is supposed to be operationally in charge of the NHS in England, as it says on the label, and they're saying, well, Rishi Sunak needs to engage. Well, I mean, Rishi Sunak has many other things to do.
Of course. So maybe the option is to say to NHS England, look, you can engage. You can offer the junior doctors and the consultants more money. I'm not actually suggesting they're all overpaid. I guess some of them are, especially those who do a lot of private work. But actually, they could say to NHS England and to the trusts involved, look, you can pay the doctors more. There's a very simple solution to this. You'll need to cut some costs elsewhere. And that means you've got to look at your administration costs. You've got to look at all the costs of things like LBGT, da-di-da-di-da.
But Martin, it's not, I mean, as the junior doctors tell us all the time, it's not about money at all. It's not about pay. It's about conditions. It's about the system. It's not about just getting more money. Of course it's about getting more money. And I just think it's ludicrous that you have, they're coming and saying we want 35%. I mean, I'm sorry, just join us here back on Earth, on the planet, where we're actually living in reality.
One could say, if this is such a serious thing that they need 35%, has the BMA been asleep for the last 10 years? Yeah. Because their wages have been eroded during that time. That's the complaint. And they've done very little about it, actually. So I think, Peter, I think you and I both know this is a political strike. Just as with all the other pledges that Rishi Sunak has made, they're determined on the left that they'll be thwarted. And of course, the pledge he's made on reducing waiting lists, there's no doubt that the doctors represented by the BMA are doing an excellent job to absolutely ensure that the waiting lists don't fall, and patients will suffer, and indeed patients will die.
And the 7.6 million people who are on those waiting lists, as you say, will suffer because of that. I mean, I totally agree with you that it is a political strike. I mean, the fact that some of the walkouts are on the same days, October the 2nd, 3rd and 4th. I mean, that's quite literally the Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday of Conservative Party conference here. I mean, that is not a coincidence.
And there'll be hundreds of them outside the conference venue, wherever that is. I think it's in Manchester.
It is in Manchester, yeah.
And, seeing them on their picket lines with their posters, it just says to me that they're demeaning their profession. My own brother is a retired doctor. He would never have thought for a moment of going on strike. And the idea that people have been forced to go on strike, nobody is forced to strike. And I think they're demeaning their profession in quite a large way. Sooner or later, the public are either going to become bored with them or actually quite angry with them.
And that is the point, isn't it, when the public lose their patience, because there is definitely, a lot of sympathy with doctors and nurses and consultants at the moment. But we do have this weird relationship. I think we perhaps talked about this before, Martin, where you have, the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister quite literally giving thanks to God for the NHS for the 75th anniversary. Yet only 29% of people who actually experience the NHS, go through an NHS experience, say that they're happy with that.
Well, I mean, it's a service that all of us are hoping that we're not going to need.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us are particularly anxious to go and spend a few weeks in our local acute hospital with some kind of illness or some kind of surgery.
Yeah.
We're hoping to keep healthy and fit.
Yeah, that's it.
So it's not something like it's not like Nando's closing down because of strikes or the cinemas or the TV engineers all go.
Although Martin, I have to be totally honest. If Nando's closed down, that would have a detrimental effect on my health, in that I wouldn't eat very much for quite a long time. But you make a very good point. Martin Gower is a former NHS Trust chair. Thank you very, very much indeed for your thoughts today. Also on health, actually, we're talking about lung cancer. I really found that call very moving. Actually, Susan has been in touch. She says about the lady with lung cancer, talking about scanning the whole body. You can actually have this done, but privately. It's called LifeScan. And 7 years ago I had it done. It cost me £800. It is a very expensive machine, but maybe the NHS should invest in that instead of squandering unnecessarily. Susan, I'm glad you have £800. There are very few people who would have that, and if they had £800 they would spend it on that. But I mean, if we are paying so much money to the NHS, the taxation that we are putting to the Treasury is the highest since the Second World War as a proportion of what the country makes, and maybe actually our public services should offer that. Because so many times we're talking about people not being able to get through to people. Those basic services aren't there. But then, for every time you say that, there'll be people who say, like, I had an amazing experience with the NHS. They were fantastic. And I've had very good experiences with the NHS. I've some terrible experiences with the NHS as well. Jane has been in touch to say so many people cannot work from home, and the people working from home rely on so many of these people, as seen during the pandemic. Absolutely correct, Jane. Absolutely correct. George says working from home is an easy option for most. Perhaps reduced salary because of the saved time and reduced expenditure would encourage a return. Working from home is part of the scheme to keep the population isolated in their 15-minute cities. It suits some jobs, the ones where people didn't go into the office before COVID and lockdowns anyway. Strikes, bad roads, ULEZ, etc., all designed to deter a return. Gary says, hi Peter, it's funny listening to your views on working from home. I've worked from home for several years. My team is split across the country, and in India and Slovakia we all seem to do okay and get our projects delivered, says Gary. Well, good for you, Gary. That's great. I mean, I've done some working from home. It's quite tricky when presenting a radio programme working from home, but I've done other stuff. And it's an interesting one because I think there are pros and cons, actually, but then there are just lots of people who can't do it. Anne says, Peter, what about friendships and relationships formed at work? These are priceless in a proper functioning society. On schools, Paul in Sunbury says, Peter, there are 22,500 schools in the UK. If we assume that a school lasts 50 years, we need 450 new builds per year. Concrete issue should be easy to fix, says Paul. National service is a big debate we've been having as well. Michael is in Kent. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Michael, you're very welcome to Talk TV. What point would you like to make this afternoon?
Hi, Peter. Thanks for taking my call. So for me personally, I'm against it. If we're talking from like a military perspective, I'm an army veteran.
Okay.
I'm personally against the argument for national service. My reason for that is, at the moment, the British Army itself currently has a retention issue with the volunteer forces. So I think that those issues that are affecting retention of the British Army need to be rectified before we try and conscript young people into the forces.
Just explain those retention issues for us, just briefly, Michael, because I think this is something a lot of people just won't be familiar with.
Yeah, so I think primarily the retention issues come from the outsourcing of contracts from the British Army. So, for example, catering these days is completely outsourced to Sodexo, the company that provides food for like the prisons and the NHS and stuff like that. They provide a very poor service. Back in the day, it would all be in-house army chefs on camps and stuff, providing food, and the food quality in like the past sort of decade in the British Army is really poor. And then as well, you've got service accommodation again, which is a bit of a lottery, depending on where you get based. In the British Army, some places, if it's one of the newer accommodations, it can be gleaming. But again, this is managed by Carillion Amy, and some of the houses on a lot of the old
there have been so many scandals about that, I'm sure there are other companies involved as well, Michael, but there have been very many issues. So you think the Army needs to get its house in order first before it starts taking on people who might be there through national service?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your thoughts there. Appreciate that, Michael. As a veteran, thank you for your service to our country as well, Michael. Appreciate that. David in Lincolnshire I think you were a Navy officer for 7 years. Is that right? That's what the producers tell me.
That's right, Peter. Yes, yeah. I joined in 1979 straight from school, and I agree with your previous caller's opinions, but for different reasons. Back in 1978, when I went for my interview to become an officer, one of the opinions that I put forward quite naively was pro-national service, saying that it would be the solution to the ills of the British youth at the time due to sort of discipline and work ethic and that type of thing. I actually wrote an essay for it. It was part of the written process for the interview. And during the board, where I was sort of grilled by a number of senior officers, I was very strongly challenged by one of the I think it was either a captain or an admiral, who said, "What makes you think we want people that don't want to be here?"
Very good point. Very good point.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously going on to be an officer beyond that and serving with lots of people, quite right. You don't want to have people in the military, especially sort of the current military, which is very technical and a sort of a very advanced sort of environment. You don't want people that don't want to be there. You want people who are motivated and want to be part of that environment. So that was my...
That's some really interesting thoughts there, David. Thank you very much indeed for those. David in Lincolnshire there, really thinking about this in a very different way as a result of what David has said. And thank you for your service to our country as well. He was a Navy officer for 7 years. David in Abergavenny has been in touch as well. David, you're on the... oh, no, not David. Kathy in Bournemouth. She wants to talk about national service as well. Kathy, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Oh, hi, Peter. I just wanted to say that I don't think the 16 to 18-year-olds, if they're listening, I'd just say, just do not go in. This is the age of Aquarius. It's the age of the individual. You're just being used. Fight for your own rights here in your own peer group. Look, a lot won't go in. There might be sick, some sort of illnesses, disabilities. They won't go in anyway. Those that could go in, they're not going to be the higher educated intellectual A-graders who've had these so-called benefits of holidays and bonding and gym, etc. along the way, and like their quietness, so they can think and be refreshed. It'll be traumatic brain injury kids, not necessarily direct, abused, hit, pushed about physically, indirectly, emotionally, paralysis by analysis, uncontrolled emotions, like the hypothalamus in the brain and pineal gland disturbed.
I mean, Kathy, I mean, there are many people who have received a huge and very valid and reasonable career through the army, and some of them in previous years have gone in through national service. There is some value to it, is there not?
No, I just don't go along with it. My dad was in the Royal Marines, and the experience I've had and known about that, honestly, I just think these kids will just be the lowest socioeconomic group with ADHDs, undiagnosed autistics, dyslexic, etc. I mean, and I just think this military thing is a generation to generation carried on, and the main focus is still it's a killing machine. At the end of the day, you can talk about bonding and fun and all the rest, but at the end of the day, what is the job doing?
Well, it's defending our country as well. I mean, that's what the army does. They're not cold-blooded killers, are they?
Well, no, but that's who they're going looking for, the ones that have had all these traumas when they've been younger.
I respectfully disagree, Kathy. Thank you for your call, Kathy, and we'll just have to agree to disagree on that one. David is in Abergavenny. What do you think about national service, David?
Well, I think it should come back for those, particularly those who cannot find work to do that suits them. At least it gives them such a broad spectrum today. Everything is so technical. It's like another university. It's not.
And David, it's interesting because this idea that's been put forward, it's not just about military service. It's about other aspects as well. It's about learning life skills. It's about doing courses and helping people and doing voluntary service and so on. It's a bit broader than the sort of original thought and what we might originally think of as simply military national service, isn't it?
Yes, well, you're quite right there. And that is much better than just straight national service in one of the services. But what it did for me was a sea cadet. I was in the war years, 1947. I'm called up. I go in, and I thought, well, everything clicked. Everything went right.
It just worked for you?
Yes. I served for a while with Prince Philip, and that was an education because he got engaged at that time.
What was he like?
What was he like?
Yeah.
A real man, fine man, and a gentleman.
Wow, that's cool. I mean, was it a bit weird seeing him marry the Princess Elizabeth, who then became the Queen?
Well, it was at a place near Bath, at the station where you all went into preliminary when you were first called up, and he got engaged, and then all hell was let loose.
And had he managed to keep it on the quiet, David? Had you any idea that Princess Elizabeth was his paramour?
You really saw a man with his wings being clipped at that time.
Well, listen, David, that's fascinating. My goodness, that went from one side of the call to a different side. My goodness, absolutely fascinating. Thank you to David in Abergavenny in Monmouthshire for his thoughts on that. Thank you also to so many people getting in touch about working from home and jobs and so on. Karen says, I had 2 paper rounds. The first one I walked it, and when I finished, the other one was at a maternity hospital. I used to jump on the bus and put everything in a trolley. The kitchen staff used to make me breakfast. I was 12, beat that. Then I went to school. Imagine a kid doing that nowadays. They can barely tie their shoelaces. Yeah, good to speak, Karen. You were very busy. You're a lot busier than I was. My 1 hour paper round, although it was 6 days. And I think it was probably the worst job I ever had, actually. It made me, but it certainly instilled the value of work, even though I got paid £8 for 6 hours work. But there we are. I can hear the distant sound of the world's tiniest violin playing. We're going to talk about the first week of ULEZ, the expansion in London. Lots of people getting in touch about that, including Ian in Wimbledon, who said ULEZ is nothing but an assault on the working classes. We'll talk to Andrew Allison, who's Chief Executive of the Freedom Association. That's coming in just a few minutes here on talkTV.
Good evening, I'm Piers Morgan, uncensored in New York City.
Yeah. King Piers and King Q. I think it's only room for one king, man. You know what I'm saying?
He's mocked your weight, Trump.
Yeah, look at him. Fail. Stop working.
Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk.
Do you believe you can win this war?
He's making me cry again.
They're trying to force you out.
Yes, I feel betrayed.
Keep it award-winning. Mwah.
Lucy Letby will die behind bars.
And a senior doctor who first raised concerns about Letby wants NHS managers to be regulated.
We needed answers a lot sooner. This is, 7 years down the line? I mean, it's completely ludicrous. We need accountability, we need performance in all walks of life.
If this nurse had misgendered somebody on a ward, she'd have been out the door.
When they first got together, there were press stories. Weighty Katie.
That would make her a better Princess of Wales.
Ghislaine Maxwell agreed to be interviewed for the very first time.
I honestly wish I'd never met him.
Donald Trump has just said he expects to be arrested at 7:30 p.m.
The Conservative Party can certainly win the next election.
Can we?
Yes,
Labour
absolutely.
29 points ahead in the polls. Can we?
Did he say, yes, I have taken drugs and they bent the rules, or lied on the visa application form and therefore got it?
There needs to be an intervention around abortion laws.
Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can determine these things.
The rest of the world has watched on in sort of mounting horror as this story has unravelled. For you, it was incredibly personal.
The death toll from the Titanic tragedy has risen to 1,522, and may God rest their souls.
Let it roll.
If we stop producing oil, the knock-on effect is far larger than just CO2.
I nearly have empathy when I'm speaking to them. I know now you're probably going to boot me off the show after saying this now. Meghan Markle. Some of them, they're easily led.
You can kiss my American ass. Thank you very much. Very nice of you.
Twitter, you sons of Can you please reinstate my account?
Yeah,
thank you.
There's a threat that you'd be worried about.
So are you saying that you're being overwhelmed, that you're inundated? We are really working hard for you, and we're just asking patients to be patient with us.
We're now in Barbie world. You weren't asked to give evidence to the grand jury.
I'm the only one that has been telling the truth.
You don't drink, never taken drugs. You're stinking rich. Should we be concerned, Prime Minister?
If it's on your mind, it's on talkTV.
Is about you and your opinions.
If you're thinking about it,
We're talking about it.
It's all about me. That's a joke.
On concrete, one texter has been in touch to say this was a 30-year product. The people who approved it should have had plans to replace it ASAP in the future, as it was always a temporary product. It was a failure from the start. They knew it was coming. That's exactly my argument. How can you not know this was? How did you not know this is going to be an issue if it's only the concrete's only meant to last 30 years? On Twitter, we've seen it all before, says this tweeter. For years, the UK has had no economic direction. Westminster is always playing the national service card. It's not really an option. Wendy Wilson, I think, would disagree with that. She says it's only for 2 weeks, this national service idea. My 20-year-old grandson has just joined the army and loves it. Well, that's great. Well, good for him. I hope he's having fun and we'll see the world and all the rest of it. I'm a big fan of people joining the army. National service, I'm not too sure about, but the armed services themselves do a fantastic job, and certainly were part of, like, they weren't perfect in Northern Ireland. There were many, many problems, but they were nonetheless part of the group of people who kept me safe growing up from terrorism, and were absolutely essential to the peace process in Northern Ireland. Wouldn't have happened without the brave men and women who were in the army, and indeed the RUC as well, and the intelligence services. They did a great job against terror, and I will always be grateful to them. Let's talk about the ultra-low emission zone. Could it mark the end of the road for Sadiq Khan? Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating in that it came in this week. And ULEZ will not help Sadiq Khan reach net zero by 2030, according to experts. It's also on the front page, I think, of the Telegraph as well. I'm not sure I have a copy of the Sunday Telegraph here. Could perhaps Chris, maybe the producer, can maybe get one, because there is a story about ULEZ as well that I was reading earlier on. What I want to do now is talk to Andrew Allison, who's Chief Executive of the Freedom Association. Andrew, you're very welcome to Talk TV. How are you?
I'm very well, Peter. You?
Yeah, very well, thanks. So let me guess, Andrew, you're delighted about ULEZ. You think it's amazing. You think Sadiq Khan is wonderful. He should definitely be given a new term as Mayor of London. That's presumably your view.
Yeah, you've just won a Guild Award for sarcasm, Peter, I think.
Tell me what you think of this. We're a week in. What's the effect of it all?
Well, you said there, could this be the end of the road for Sadiq Khan? Well, yes, it quite possibly could, because more than 60% of Londoners live in those outer London boroughs that are now being affected by ULEZ. And we know that the extension of ULEZ to these outer boroughs is not going to really make any difference to air quality. It's really all to do with Sadiq Khan grabbing as much money as he can, because he's desperately short of cash to fund TfL. And when you look at some of the areas that are affected, I mean, they're villages. They just happen to have been caught from the 1960s into the London urban sprawl.
But it affects so many people, Andrew. You've got an area. The outer London area has the same population as Scotland. I should say, my producer Chris has just handed me the article I was reading earlier before the programme in the Sunday Telegraph. Sadiq Khan's ultra-low emission zone will not help to reach his goal of achieving net zero by 2030, according to leading independent experts. They argue the number of non-compliant cars is likely to fall only by a relatively small number, and would likely have happened anyway because of new industry standards. Using ULEZ to achieve net zero would take more than a century, said one expert.
Exactly. As I say, some of these places are villages, but it's also people, of course, who live just outside of the London boundary who have to come in for work. And I'm sure as the months go by, we're going to hear lots about these people who are trying to run their own businesses, hearing about nurses, cleaners, lots of lower paid people who desperately need their car but can't afford to buy a new car, a ULEZ compliant car, even though the car is perfectly legal because it's passed an MOT, so it's safe to be on the roads. We're going to hear a lot about these people. But £12.50 a day is a lot of money.
In terms of your members, in terms of people you've spoken to, Andrew, your sense of this and so on, has much changed in the last week since it's actually been implemented? Are people getting to grips with it, or are they still as angry as they've been?
Still as angry, and I think this is just going to continue. I mean, I've heard that there's, over 500, around 600 of the ULEZ cameras have either been destroyed or have been vandalised, spray paint put on them. And it seems... And
I'm sure you would never, as I certainly wouldn't...
I don't condemn... I don't condone them. Of
Yeah,
course
absolutely,
I don't.
absolutely. But at the same time, you can understand it. You can understand their frustration without condoning it.
I can understand the frustration, yes, because this is a lot of money. If you need to use your car in those outer London boroughs for 7 days a week, well, that's about £87.50, I think, if my maths are correct. That is a lot of money. And it's affecting the elderly, those people who need to go to hospital appointments. It's affecting those who are poorer in society. I mean, I think it was Eva Santini on one of the talkTV shows last week said, well, if they don't have a ULEZ compliant car, why don't they just buy one that is? Well, it really is not as simple as that.
Well, it's all of this, isn't it? I mean, even if you get the £3,000 scrappage scheme, when was the last time you bought a ULEZ compliant car for £3,000? I mean, when was the last time you could buy? There aren't very many cars you could buy for £3,000, to be honest. And also electric vehicles and so on. I mean, the Green Mob want us to buy electric cars, which are 30 grand, and then they want us to buy a heat pump, which we may or may not have space for outside our homes. We may live in a flat, we may live in a street where there just isn't room for one, and they want us to spend another 20 grand on that. Net zero as an idea, I'm sure we all want clean air, we all want a nice green space and look out the window and everything to be wonderful, but the kind of price that is being put on this for net zero, I think, is too high. But also things like ULEZ, when you're duped, when there are, let's face it, lies that we're told about ULEZ, and then it being implemented. I just think Sadiq Khan has a major case to answer here.
He does have a major case to answer for, and he really does have a major problem. I think he could have a major problem at the mayoral election next year, and it could also knock on to Labour's prospects in winning some of those seats.
Well, Keir Starmer and other people seem to have run away from this policy. Yeah.
Well, they have. I mean, Keir Starmer's view these days, I think, on this is whatever is most likely to get me elected and put it into Downing Street.
Well, indeed,
what his policy is going to be.
Andrew, thank you very much indeed. Andrew, just before you go, Andrew Allison there, Chief Executive of the Freedom Association. At the very start, I had a very sarcastic introduction to you. Andrew, do you know what the difference between someone who makes the sarcastic remark and the person who doesn't get it? You got it, but the person who doesn't get it, do you know what that's called?
I don't think I do, no.
It's called the sarcasm.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry about that. Andrew, lovely to see you. Andrew Allison there, Chief Executive of the Freedom Association. Dreadful pun there at the end. And he makes a lot of very, very good points about ULEZ. And we were told lies. We were told lies by Sadiq Khan. I'm sorry, that is factual. Thank you to Andrew in Salisbury. He says national service should be voluntary. If you don't know what to do with your life, then this should be an option. Andrew, I think you're right, actually. It shouldn't really be mandatory. I don't think there are too many things that can be mandatory this year. This time anyway, in this world. Martin is in London and has given me a call, 0344 499 1000. Martin, you're very welcome to talkTV. What point would you like to make?
Yeah, I've got 2 points really about the national service. Related points. Primarily, where they get the mandate for this? This is not part of their manifesto.
Well, they're not saying they're necessarily doing it. They're just saying it's an idea.
Yeah, an idea, but where did they get that idea? We didn't vote for that. I didn't vote for that.
It's come from one of these think tanks. It's come from one of these policy people who sit around having ideas.
Yeah, exactly. That I'm sure we pay for, but you sometimes.
No, well, not really. The think tanks are generally funded by other organisations, but I know what you mean. It's a kind of, lots of people come up with lots of different ideas in terms of what should be done and so on. But is it an idea you support?
I don't know, really. I think there's good and bad, but I think related to that, the second point, and even if it was part of any sort of manifesto, they're talking about imposing this on 16-year-olds who don't get to vote anyway. So they're all of a sudden going to come up with this great idea that, like, all their great ideas, like ULEZ and the immigration barge thing, and they're going to come up with this great idea and impose it on someone who has no choice in the matter.
Well, they're saying it should be voluntary, but that's an interesting point, actually, about 16-year-olds. Do you think they should have the opportunity to vote?
I personally do, yeah. I mean, if we've given them that education, they get to 16, they're taking
I say wait to 18, Martin. Wait till you get a job, start paying taxes, then give me your opinion. That's what I say.
Yeah, but then if we have confidence in our education system to the point where we're examining them at 16, surely that should also be the point where we have confidence in them to make a decision about their world and their future.
It's a fair point, Martin, but do you have confidence in that education system?
Well, no, but my son's 14, and I have confidence in his ability to make that decision. Certainly in 2 years' time, I think he could and should be able to make decisions that affect him, yes.
Well, I mean, clearly an intelligent person like yourself, Martin, but there are lots of 16-year-olds who may not know, and the problem, I suppose, would be, well, I just think they should wait till 18. But then again, it was 21 at one stage and all the rest of it. But Martin, lots of really interesting points there. Thank you very much indeed. That was Martin in London there, giving us his thoughts on that, and we'll be taking many more calls, texts and tweets in the next hour between now and 4 o'clock before Tricia Goddard takes over. We'll also be looking forward a little bit because Parliament is back this week after its long summer recess. They're back for a full 2 weeks before they go off again for the conferences, for the political party conferences. I'm going to be heading up to both Manchester and Liverpool for those. Manchester for the Conservatives, Liverpool for Labour. We're going to talk to Joe Twyman, the founder of Deltapol, and also Charlie Rowley, who's a former government advisor, about what they think is coming up, what we need to look out for this autumn. So, and I want your views on it too. So get in touch, 0344 499 1000.
This is talkTV.
Lively debate, intelligent conversation. Join me, Dr. David Bull, on talkTV every week.
Join me every day from Monday to Friday, 3 p.m. until 5 p.m. for news, views, and a mega dose of attitude. Tune in if you dare.
Well, you're very welcome to Talk TV. I don't know if you've just joined us, but we've been having a really fascinating debate about all sorts of things. National service. We heard from someone who did his national service with Prince Philip, bizarrely, which was really interesting. We were also talking about working from home. We're talking about the politics that will be happening this week because Parliament is back. We'll talk about that in a second with two experts. What can we expect? Will things move in the right direction, or will the problems for Rishi Sunak just continue? We're also going to be talking to a psychotherapist, Lucy Beresford, about polyamorous relationships. Are you in a throuple? Chance to be a fine thing. Apparently Rita Ora, Carol Vorderman and Tilda Swinton have been voted the top British polyamorous celebs. Yeah, interesting one. Also this hour, we'll be taking as many calls as we can. I can see the phones going already. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me at 72222. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. And a little experiment today. We're going to do it for the next 3 weeks. Many of my viewers know that on my Saturday show between 10 and 1 that we do Cat of the Week, which is a very, very popular segment. But now, because I'm on Sundays for a few weeks, I'm going to try something new and call it Rescue Animal of the Week. I'm a big fan of rescue animals, adopting and not shopping, not going to breeders, but adopting animals that really need a home from a shelter, an animal shelter for cats or dogs. So I believe this is the first rescue animal of the week is a dog, and we will have Tech Up Dave, my trusty sidekick, in the studio to tell us all about that. So that's all coming up in the next hour here on Talk TV. So there's lots going on politically at the moment. We've got the prospect, we don't know exactly the date yet, but probably in the next 4 or 5 weeks, we will have the by-election in Nadine Dorry's former constituency of Mid-Bedfordshire. There's also going to be a Rutherglen by-election. That's in Scotland because the former MP, Margaret Ferrier, SNP, she was actually was given community service for travelling on a train with COVID. She shouldn't have done that. There was what's called a recall petition in her constituency, where if more than 10% of people who live in that area say there should be a by-election, that the MP should lose their seat and there should be an election. She's not standing in that. We have Parliament returning this week for 2 weeks, and then Parliament goes on another recess for the conferences, which, it's a very, very busy political time. You may think, oh, they're on recess, they're on holiday again. Not quite. The conferences will be there. We'll have the Lib Dems, SNP conferences, various other smaller parties as well, including Reform UK. We'll also have the really big ones are Labour and the Conservatives, of course. It's a different order this year. It's usually the Conservatives last, but Conservatives are going first this year. On the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of October, they're going to be in Manchester. By a remarkable and complete coincidence, I'm being sarcastic, the doctors and consultants strike is at the same time as that. We're also going to then have Labour conference. We're going to hear from Keir Starmer what he wants to do. All of this leading up to things like the autumn statement from the Chancellor. We're also going to have the King's speech in November. Really, really busy political time. There might even be another reshuffle between now and Christmas. That's certainly what some of my sources are telling me. I'm also political editor of this station, as well, as you might know. So loads going on, and also when's the election going to be in 2024? I now think it'll probably be October or November, so we probably have another year to go. But really, really busy political time, to say nothing of the fact that the American political system is gearing up for a presidential election in November 2024 as well. So really big, busy political time. It kicks off this week. Let's think about it, guide us through it. Two great guides. Joe Twyman, who is the founder of Delta Poll, also known as the King of Polls. He is with me now, as is Charlie Rowley, who is a former government advisor, has worked at the very, very highest level of the Conservative Party and the government of this country. You're both very, very welcome to the show. Charlie, maybe I can start with you and ask you, we had Andrew Gwynn on earlier, who is the Shadow Public Health Minister, senior person in Labour, and he said this is basically Labour's to win. Everything that's going to happen, the 5 pledges that we're going to get the results of, the scorecard in early January. Rishi Sunak said, judge me by my record. He basically sees it as not quite a home run for Keir Starmer, but all of the things that are happening are challenges for Rishi Sunak. Can he turn the super tanker around?
Well, good afternoon, PD. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not a home run for anyone, because as we get closer to any election, the polls tend to close anyway. You're absolutely right in what you say that Rishi Sunak has set out, or both party leaders have set out 5 key priorities or pledges or missions, whatever you want to call them. But I think the reality that people seem to know the Prime Minister's 5 priorities more than Sir Keir Starmer's, I think is a sign of the operation, the political operation, the communications operation that's in place within the Conservative Party and in Number 10 to make sure that the public know exactly what the Prime Minister stands for, so they know what his priorities are, and they know what he's going to have to deliver on. So that's reducing debt, growing the economy, halving inflation by the end of the year, which the Chancellor...
I can't believe you remembered them all. I'm really impressed.
Yes. Well, reducing waiting times in the NHS and stopping the boats.
Oh wow, you're very on brand. I like it. It's interesting actually because this week we've had the reshuffle. We have a new Defence Secretary, that is Grant Shapps. We have a new Energy, Security and Net Zero Secretary, that is Claire Coutinho. Not known to many people, but I know you know her personally, Charlie. I know her as well. I've known her for 20 years actually. I think she will do a good job. We've also had a few changes behind the scenes. The very senior person, Director of Communications at 10 Downing Street, she has left. She's been brought. Another person has been promoted. Narissa Chesterfield is her name. I know her as well. We both know her as well. She'll do a fantastic job, I'm sure, in very, very difficult circumstances for the Conservative Party. And you've got Jamie and Njoku Goodwin, who's going to be the new Director of Strategy at Number 10. I mean, is this just getting the house in order, quite literally the house that is Number 10, in order for the battles ahead? Or is there more of a crisis here? Because there are reports of tensions, not just in terms of the advisors, the world that we used to inhabit, but also in terms of the party not being entirely happy. Some reports of letters going into Sir Graham Brady about Rishi Sunak as well.
Well, there are always letters and people that sort of will never be happy with anyone. So we can put that to one side. But you're absolutely right. All of the changes that seem to have taken place, whether it's around the cabinet table or behind the scenes and behind the door of Number 10, everybody seems to be well known, well liked, and well equipped to do the job that they're now being tasked to do. So whether you're new into Number 10, and there's some fantastic hires and some brilliant changes there.
But I mean, Charlie, you're painting a very rosy picture. Do they not have an uphill battle here? I mean, 15 to 20 points behind in the polls. Let's go to ask Joe Twyman about that. I mean, we've seen the captain of the ship, Rishi Sunak, to continue the metaphor, changing some of those who are on the bridge with him. But the supertanker is heading for electoral defeat, is it not?
Well, the problem is that at the moment the supertanker is sinking and the band keeps playing on, although I'm not sure you do have a band on a supertanker, but who knows. I think the difficulty that the Conservatives face and continue to face is that they are not very popular. They're not very popular in terms of the headline voting intention. Rishi Sunak had, in his defence, managed to close the gap to around about 10-15 points before the spate of Boris Johnson-themed resignations, of which Nadine Dorries was eventually one. But since then, the gap has been around about 20 to 25 points in some polls, and consistently well over what is needed to get Labour over the line. Now, it is true that we expect the polls to narrow in the run-up to the actual general election, whether that's in May or autumn next year. But underlying the headline voting intention are very poor leadership ratings for Rishi Sunak, much better leadership ratings for Keir Starmer, and appalling figures for the Conservatives across so many different issues, whether it's the cost of living, the economy, crime, immigration, rights of the motorist, all of these big ticket items. The public believe that the Labour Party are doing better than the Conservatives on all of them. There's no real area of strength for the Conservatives. And I expect that come the party conference season, we shall see a firing of the gun on what could be a very long election phony war, if you like. But despite the fact that it could be very long, the task ahead is enormous. Having said all of that, though, by historical standards, the swing that Labour needs is still extraordinarily large just to get a majority of two. And they would need to outperform Tony Blair in 1997 if they're to get anything approaching a workable majority.
So it sort of looks a bit like a hung parliament. In terms of the information we have at the moment, that can change, and I'm very much looking forward the day after the election asking you, Joe, why did the pollsters get it so wrong, as I am constitutionally mandated to do. But with the information, more seriously, the information we have at the moment, it looks as if a hung parliament is probably going to happen.
Well, we ask, is there a general election tomorrow, and that's what the data is based on, but it's a snapshot. We expect, by historical standards, as Charlie said, for the gap to close, and again, based on historical precedent, we would expect something approaching a hung parliament to a narrow Labour lead. But there is a year to go, and a lot can happen in that time. The Conservatives could, potentially, improve their position significantly, but they could get a lot worse as well. And I don't think it really matters that much at the moment whether people have a particularly good idea of what Keir Starmer is up to, what his beliefs are, what his values are, what his issues and policies are. I don't think it does matter, because people are instead simply so disappointed by the Conservatives, and that is what comes through in all of the polling.
I've known Joe Twyman for 13 years, Charlie. He's not, I have no idea how he votes. He's not an anti-Conservative person. He's not a pro-Labour person, nothing. He is simply telling us the facts of what he, as a pollster for the last 25 years, can see in the polls. It would be a miracle if Rishi Sunak won the 2024 election, would it not?
Well, the two things that I'd say, and I agree with Joe, in fact, that look, every poll that's conducted, it's a snapshot of just any given time, and I think what is an advantage, I suppose, to the government and to Rishi and to the Conservative Party is that I think there are still lots of people that are not thinking about politics at the minute. We've had so much politics that's gone on over the last few years. If you ask people about a general election tomorrow, of course they might want change. They might just want to sort of, get rid of this, current lot that have gone through Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, and all the rest of it. But when the time comes to the actual election and people have to focus their minds, those polls will narrow. And I think the other thing that Joe was saying that is right. The Conservatives as a brand is very tarnished. It's very difficult to be a Conservative at the minute because of that history. But if Rishi Sunak is able to deliver on his priorities, and it's a team that is very committed to Rishi, if it's a united Conservative Party, something that we haven't seen necessarily over the last few years, and you have a divided Labour Party over some policy issues, then of course the balance in which the public will see between the two, Rishi Sunak, also Keir Starmer, for who they want to actually be the Prime Minister of the country rather than the political parties, we might see a change.
How divided do you think Labour is, Charlie, in your assessment? Obviously, ULEZ is a massive issue for them. We have a diametrically opposed view now that Keir Starmer has seen sense on that ridiculous policy, and Sadiq Khan is pressing on with it. What other areas do you think they're perhaps not united on in your assessment?
Well, I think they've got a bumpy selection process themselves. So there are the mayor of the North East Tyneside, Jamie O'Driscoll, I think has been deselected. So they'll have some internal warfare over the selection of their candidates.
We've had the entire Keith Vaz's former constituency party, the sort of administration of that, and I think is it Leicester East has been suspended as well. There are problems there as well.
Something like that, and I think you're right. I mean, we saw a snapshot just the other week about child benefit. Yes. The cap of two children. That's something where internally the Labour Party seemed quite shocked by. They didn't just follow the leader, as it were, in that sense. So we might see more of that over the next weeks and months, where Labour haven't had the scrutiny compared to what the Conservatives.
And that was to do with Scotland, really, wasn't it, Joe Twyman? And I mean, you always say, divided parties don't win elections. These divisions are there. Any political party is a coalition. There will be people who disagree with people on other things. But just talk a little bit about Scotland and how incredibly important that is for Keir Starmer if he wants to win a majority.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, well, to just take up on a point that was mentioned, a lot of those divisions that you're talking about are local and sometimes hyper-local factors. When you ask the public which party is united and divided, people generally think the Labour Party is united. Now, that doesn't suggest that they don't have cracks. Indeed, all parties do. I think their greatest danger could be among either either among attitudes to the previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and so that faction and how that plays out in a general election, whether that sees them as united, divided, or whether they divide over a specific issue, whether it's something like a specific like child benefit, or it could be something general like trans rights, for instance, something that is very important to a small and vocal number of people, but actually could potentially be damaging to the unity of the party. But having said all of that, Scotland remains hugely important. If they're to get over the line, if Labour are to get that majority and get into Downing Street, then they're going to need a lot of seats in Scotland. At least half the seats are available, I would suggest. They only they have fewer than 10.
And that would be a remarkable turnaround in fortunes for them, wouldn't it?
Yes, but of course the SNP is going through difficulty now of its own. And really the two by-elections that are coming up represent two fronts, I guess, of the battle in the war that Labour are waging to win the election. They have Mid Beds, a constituency that's been Conservative since 1931, and under all normal conditions you would not expect Labour to be in with a chance of winning, but given what has gone previously, the expectations are that they can win there, although it's by no means guaranteed. And then you have in Scotland the by-election that demonstrates the kind of seats that Labour need to win back at the general election if they are to if not remove, then at least soften the grip that the SNP has there and help nationally with their seat count. So two very different but very important by-elections coming up, and they could be timed to happen the day after the Conservative Party conference.
Well, that would be fascinating. That would be fascinating.
Or the day after the Labour Party conference.
Yeah, indeed. And Charlie Rooley, it's interesting you talked. Joe was talking there about people not necessarily, and you were as well, actually, not actively thinking about politics. It brings me back to Tony Blair's autobiography, A Journey, when he said that the hardest thing for any practising politician to remember is that most people, most days of the week, don't give politics a second thought. I read that in the extracts in the newspaper, wouldn't buy the book, because he should be in jail in The Hague. But, Charlie, I wonder if you were to see this in a sporting way, which one is the Arsenal and which one is the Man United?
Arsenal finished second in the table last year, and nobody wants to finish second in the general election.
I knew you were off to the match between Arsenal and Man United. I was told by my producer. You'll be hoping for a victory today, anyway.
I will. That's the only red in my life is Arsenal.
I like it.
I follow Piers Morgan in that sense, but I'll be supporting them today.
Gents, thank you very much indeed. Joe Twyman there, founder of Delta Poll, king of polls, and Charlie Rooley, former government advisor, is off to the Emirates Stadium to see Arsenal versus Manchester United, and very kindly did the interview with us nonetheless. Someone's been in touch, says, what does polyamorous mean? Polyamorous means that you have more than one partner, and that presumably everybody knows about it, but there are lots of politicians, celebrities who have done this. Apparently Carol Vorderman, Rita Ora, Tilda Swinton. Apparently it's all the rage now to have a throuple where it's like a couple, only there are three people in it. I think there was a boxer, wasn't there? Is it Anthony Joshua who had a throuple as well? I can't remember. I'm looking at blank faces here. David Hay, who had it. Apologies. Sorry, wow. Sorry, I just had one of those moments where I realised how old I am. In that Matt, who's our technical operator, who's about 15, has said on my ear, "Who's Carol Vorderman?" Who's Carol? Anyway, I'll explain to him during the break. We're going to talk about this in just a few minutes here on talkTV.
Good evening, I'm Piers Morgan, uncensored in New York City.
Yeah. King Piers and King Q. I think it's only room for one king, man. You know what I'm saying?
He's mocked your weight, Trump.
Yeah, look at him. Fail. Stop working.
Just because they're skin folk don't mean they're kin folk.
Do you believe you can win this war?
He's making me cry again.
They're trying to force you out.
Yes, I feel betrayed.
Keep it award-winning. Mwah.
Lucy Letby will die behind bars.
And a senior doctor who first raised concerns about Letby wants NHS managers to be regulated.
We needed answers a lot sooner. This is, 7 years down the line? I mean, it's completely ludicrous.
We need accountability, we need performance in all walks of life.
If this nurse had misgendered somebody on a ward, she'd have been out the door.
When they first got together, there were press stories. Weighty Katie.
That would make her a better Princess of Wales.
Ghislaine Maxwell agreed to be interviewed for the very first time.
I honestly wish I'd never met him.
Donald Trump has just said he expects to be arrested at 7:30 p.m.
The Conservative Party can certainly win the next election.
Can we?
Yes.
Labour
absolutely.
29 points ahead in the polls. Can we? Did he say, yes, I have taken drugs and they bent the rules, or lied on the visa application form and therefore got it?
There needs to be an intervention around abortion laws.
Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can determine these things.
The rest of the world has watched on in sort of mounting horror as this story has unravelled. For you, it was incredibly personal.
The death toll from the Titanic tragedy has risen to 1,522, and may God rest their souls.
Let it roll.
If we stop producing oil, the knock-on effect is far larger than just CO2.
I nearly have empathy when I'm speaking to them. I know now you're probably going to boot me off the short saying this now. Oh, Meghan Markle, about Meghan Markle. Some of them, they're easily led.
You can kiss my American ass. Thank you very much. Very nice of you.
Twitter, you sons of... Can you please reinstate my account?
Yeah,
Thank you.
There's a threat that you'd be worried about.
So are you saying that you're being overwhelmed, that you're inundated? We are really working hard for you, and we're just asking patients to be patient with us.
We're now in Barbie world. You weren't asked to give evidence to the grand jury.
I'm the only one that has been telling the truth.
You don't drink, never taken drugs. You're stinking rich. Should we be concerned, Prime Minister?
If it's on your mind, it's on talkTV.
Is about you and your opinions.
If you're thinking about it,
We're talking about it.
It's all about me. That was a joke.
Well, thanks to everyone who has been in touch this afternoon, including Stephen Lancashire, who wants to talk about national service. Big debate. I'll take a couple more calls on this before we end the programme at 4 o'clock. Tricia's taking over between 4 and 7. Regarding conscription, says Steve, it could be a natural progression from this. We need discipline and respect taught as a lesson in schools. There are many ex-servicemen that would be perfect to teach in schools, and for the real problem children, there needs to be an ex-sergeant who teachers send for when they can no longer cope, and he or she needs to give powers not only to deal with the problem but to engage with parents. It's not about schoolwork, just behaviour. That's what the person is for. Discipline. That's a really, really interesting one. And actually, we've seen a number of schools where discipline is at absolutely the centre. I'm thinking of Catherine Burble sings. She's on here every now and again, school principal of the Michaela School. There are people absolutely clamouring to get into that school because of its focus on discipline and the fact that children who have very difficult starts in life, often low, poor areas. I was about to say low socioeconomic areas, poor areas. Let's be honest about what they are. Coming into that school, having a very strong sense of discipline, and getting brilliant results and all the rest of it. Jane has been in touch on politics. She says, "Hi Peter. To be honest, a new party is needed. Both sides of the House have let the public down. Where was the opposition during the pandemic? Labour wanted more lockdown. Many won't forget that," says Jane. Joe in Belfast has also been in touch. She says, "Peter, just want to thank you for your great words regarding the security forces in Northern Ireland during the dark times. As I mentioned, I had two extremely close family members serving during those awful years. One was in the army, one was in the RUC. The whole family lived each day with a certain trepidation, but just tried to get on with it. After all the time, it is so lovely to know appreciation is still there. I've always had and still do immense support for our military with regard to this national service. Are the military fully agreeable, I wonder?" Well, we actually had that point a little bit earlier on. And Joe, thank you. And I think the huge contribution of those people in uniform, and actually not in uniform as well, the security services, the army, and also the RUC, is often forgotten because there are scandals. There are things that went wrong that shouldn't have happened. There were serious problems. But the vast majority of people, the 250,000 people, actually, 250,000 plus people who served in uniform during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, most of them did a great job. And Joe, thank you for that message. And the peace process would not have been possible without them. From the Sublime to the Ridiculous, Annie has been in touch and says, Caterpillar of the Week, anyone? Just found one while gardening and listening to you at the same time. We are, in fact, having Rescue Animal of the Week, a new segment for the next 3 weeks when I'm here on a Sunday. My usual show is on a Saturday between 10 and 1, but I'm here on Sunday between 1 and 4 for the next few weeks at least. We'll see how it goes. And we're having Rescue Animal of the Week. Tech Up Dave will be in the studio fairly soon. But I'm delighted, first of all, that Lucy Beresford, who is a psychotherapist and broadcaster, is with me now. Lucy, we're here to talk about polyamorous relationships. What is a polyamorous relationship?
It's where you're in a relationship, presumably an intimate relationship and therefore a sexual relationship, but it doesn't have to just be about sex, with another person, and therefore there are a minimum of 3 of you in that relationship and all of you have consented to that structure.
So everybody knows what's going on, everybody's fully abreast of the situation.
In an ideal world, and there may even be ground rules that have been drawn up in advance to make sure that everyone is up to speed with how this relationship will be conducted. As I say, some of them are about sexual relationship, but for some it's just about different intimacy, a different sense of sharing, getting a different sense of energy in your relationship. And in fact, there was some amazing research, firstly by YouGov, who've been talking about some celebrities who
there are quite a few of them, aren't there?
The key celebrities that people in the UK in particular are interested in having relationships with are Rita Ora, that probably is not a great surprise to people, Tilda Swinton, who's lived a bohemian life for many decades, and Carol Vorderman, who
Matt's never heard of. So who is Carol Vorderman if you've never heard of her?
I think she used to be a presenter on Countdown. And recently she has spoken about how she has 5 special friends.
Wow.
So, and this is really interesting. So there is
That's a scheduling challenge.
There's well, speak for yourself. I also found some research by Ashley Madison, the married dating website people, and they have identified that quite a lot of people, particularly women, 1 in 4 of their members actually say that they are currently in a non-monogamous relationship.
Although, in fairness, people who are involved who are on Ashley Madison who want affairs.
But only 13% of men. I mean, it's women who are leading this.
Wow.
And I think it speaks to women taking more control of the kind of relationships that they want going forward, and perhaps not feeling completely fulfilled in the relationships that they currently have. Their needs are not being met completely, so they're outsourcing
We'll
it.
explore that a little bit in a second, but Ruth has been in touch on text. She says polyamorous, there's another derogatory word for that. No wonder STIs are on the up, sexually transmitted infections. I mean, there will be a lot of people who say, hold on a second here.
Well, that's why you have ground rules. That's why you say, what are we going to do about protection? What are we going to do about consent? Are we going to tell our families?
But there will be people who morally say, you should have one partner.
There are some people who may say that, and then there are other people who will say that marriage is a construct that was created in the 13th century to formalise unions so that there were, again, a different set of ground rules. All relationships, to some degree, require a sense of both parties being on the same page. And if you introduce more people to that, and it turns out that 44% of men, perhaps no surprise here, want to be in a quadruple. A quadpole.
A thruple and a quadpole. So what happens in a quadpole?
Well, you have 4 people. And as you alluded to, that maybe there is a diary component to that might make it more tricky.
I had a friend who had a woman who had 4 gentlemen on the go at one stage, and what she found was that she contacted one through text messages, one through Facebook Messenger, one through WhatsApp, and one through some other messaging service, and said that was the way to kind of keep it sort of organised.
But I suppose that's not quite the same, because that sounds like they didn't know about the other. Exactly.
No,
so polyamory is very much around everybody being aware of what the structure is and being consenting around it.
I mean, you're a psychotherapist. You're someone who has views on this, and you've talked to many people over many hours about relationships. Do you think it can work? Do you think it's the right solution for people, or is it actually just something that can store up problems?
There are definitely problems that can happen, but you could say the same about a monogamous relationship. The key is about consent and about checking in on those ground rules all the time. And in a way, you would do that in your monogamous relationship. My worry is that it does fuel jealousy and perhaps sense of inadequacy, which again is why you need to have big, deep conversations about it.
I have one friend, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lucy, but I have one friend I'm just thinking about here who got married and said to her, she's quite a bit younger than me, she got married and said to her husband, we are going to have an open relationship, which is slightly different from this, and, you know, I'm going to go off and have sex with other people. And the husband said, yeah, that's fine, no problem. And then it actually led to the end of the marriage because she was happy to do that. He was, in theory, able to do that, but chose not to do that. And actually what people perhaps sign up for is maybe something that they're not entirely happy with.
Yes, so
in the longer term.
Funnily enough, there was another piece of research by Ashley Madison about 3 or 4 months ago, which talked about contracts, couples contracts, which is this way in which you actually identify what the rules will be. And as you say, you could intellectually say, I'm going to sign up for something, but once you're in it, there's a movie that's just come out called Passages, which I saw yesterday, which again is about a threesome that know about the other, but not everyone is on the same page and not everyone is in the same emotional investment as everybody else. And that's where it's going to go wrong. If you're not on the same page, if you haven't got the same emotional investment or the emotional agenda, one might say, then it will start to unravel. I can't really judge and say whether it's morally questionable or not. I think if it works for you and for some people, and I think in terms of relationship fluidity, it is working for an increasing number of people, as this research from Ashley Madison and YouGov both identify. But if it's not your bag, then you have to be open enough to be able to say, I don't want that. And therefore, what are the implications for our relationship if I'm that honest?
I must say, the older I get, the less I judge people about these kind of things. I know people who've had affairs, I know people who have weird and wonderful relationships, I know lots of people with lots of different sexualities. I mean, I don't really care. I mean, if people are happy and they're not damaging other people and everything's consensual, well, that's okay. And I suppose I'm pretty socially liberal in that regard. I just wonder if this can actually work. And you're saying, you know, it can work, but we've seen some of those celebrities, haven't we? I think David Hay was the one I was thinking of, where people sort of say, well, you know, if it's 3 people, for example, there's 1 man and 2 women. I mean, that can't really be 3 equal people. If you have a
but it depends what you're bringing to that relationship, because as I said, it might not necessarily just be about sex, or it might not necessarily just be about intimacy or friendship. What it is giving is very different energy, and you might find that your primary relationship, if you can call it that, will benefit from it because you're not disappointed that the other person isn't meeting all your needs, because there is someone else who's meeting some other of those needs. And if that as a triangle works for all 3 parties, then that's got to be a really good thing.
It's really interesting you mention that, because I think, I mean, I'm sure there will be people who agree with you and there will be people who disagree with you in this as well. It's fascinating that, I mean, you're someone who I've interviewed a number of times, and I know that you have an open mind in regard to this. What would you say to people who actually are hearing this perhaps for the first time or watching this for the first time and thinking, actually, do you know what, that's just too out there, it's just something that doesn't actually relate to my life at all. I'm married to the same person I've been married for a long time. It wouldn't enter my head or their head to ever involve ourselves in this kind of thing. What would you say to those people who wouldn't necessarily want to take part in this kind of relationship, but actually it's new to them?
If it's new to them, but they are very happy and fulfilled in their existing relationship, then I'm cheering them on, because that's all I ever really want for people, is that they have fulfilling relationships. What I do observe is that there are some people who, an increasing number of people I see, stay in unhappy or miserable relationships because they don't realise they have permission to do something else. And I completely appreciate that there may be children involved, there may be a mortgage involved, there may be an awful lot of guilt around different behaviours. But if you're miserable, you only have one life, is all I would say. And that actually, if there are ways in which you could explore opportunities, if somebody is listening or watching you today and is thinking to themselves, maybe I could have a conversation with my partner about this. I was listening to Peter Cardwell and he was talking about this. At least have the conversation, because you never know what may come back at you. Is someone saying, you know what, I've been thinking the same thing too. And do you want to lie on a deathbed?
But alternatively,
say,
the person could say, but Lucy, alternatively, the person could say that's a horrible thing, and I actually feel devalued by you even suggesting it.
Yes, and my argument, my comment to that would be to say that those kinds of conversations happen in monogamous relationships in any way, that actually you can find that there are ways in which you no longer meet if you've been together 20 or 30 or 40 years, that actually you do grow and you do change. And the best relationships are where you can put everything out there and discuss it with no judgment, with no fear that there will be, hostility or repercussions, but to actually just put your heart out there and say, but this is something I'd like to talk about, or this is something that makes me uncomfortable. There's got to be permission for both sides.
Terry is in Dover and has given us a call on 0344 499 1000. Terry, you're very welcome to Talk TV. What do you make of this?
Oh, good afternoon, Peter. I tuned in rather late to your programme today. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. You can always look back on talk.tv on the app or indeed on YouTube. But what point would you like to make on polyamory?
Yeah. I mean, I thought I tuned into a soft porn channel at first. But no, that's a serious point. Can people not just have friends? Rather than indulging in sexual relationships all over the place. I know it's consensual and it's subjective. And ostensibly you're not harming anybody, but cannot people just have one person relation and grow within that relationship?
Well, let's put that to Lucy Beresford.
And Terry, thanks so much for calling in, because I think you're right. I think that is a possible model for a lot of people, that they meet someone and they
probably the majority of people. Let's face it.
The majority, but you could argue that that's the model that's been sold to us. If you're read, Cinderella and Prince Charming and Sleeping Beauty from a very early age, that's the model that you assume works. And what we're observing nowadays is that people want to be more fluid. If you're going to live to 120 and you meet someone when you're 24, can you actually envisage being with them for 90 years?
Well, what do you make of that, Terry? Terry, are you still there?
To answer that specific point, the oldest person ever lived was 122. But an extreme example. No, I couldn't. No, I couldn't really. No.
Are you? What sort of relationship are you in, if any, Terry?
I'm single, and I've been single for most of my life. I feel a bit claustrophobic in relationships. I'm an only child. I read a lot. So, that's me.
But Terry, that's the beautiful thing. That is what works for you. And my observation is that for quite a lot of people, and increasingly women are driving this, as the Ashley Madison research showed, that actually if you have an opportunity to live a life on your terms and to have fulfillment in the way that you want, which is what is happening for you, Terry, as well, I would want that for people. I want people to have the life that works for them.
Does your life work for you, Terry? Are you fulfilled?
Yes, I think so. As I say, I do read a lot. I've got a lot of interest that way. But as I said at the outset, it is sort of highly subjective, isn't it? I mean, there's no sort of measure of objectivity you can bring to this. It's what works.
What works for you within the relationship, and that's why I always feel that couples need to keep up the level of communication, so that even if you do end up in a polyamorous relationship and there are 3 or 4 or maybe even 5 of you, that actually the communication is consistent, that it doesn't get outsourced. So what I have seen in certain polyamorous relationships is that some conversations take place between couple A and person A and person B, and then a different type of conversation between person A and person C, and that's what starts to fragment the relationship. That if you can be there in a way, as Terry says, to have the life that works for you.
Terry, thanks for your call. I appreciate that, and thanks for being so honest as well. These kind of issues are perhaps not the easiest thing to talk about. That was Terry and Dover there. Christina in the West Midlands has been in touch as well. He says, celebrities break all moral ground, and my concern is that the moral norm is going to be thrown out the window as society's upside-down behaviour continues. Celebrities set examples, and poor examples like polyamory is concerning for a model way of behaviour. It's not acceptable and should not get airtime, says Christina. What do you think, Lucy?
Well, I'm really glad that it has got airtime, so that people can start to think whether the existing model works for them. And I think we have to be careful about pointing the finger at celebrities, because my observation, certainly within my clinical work, is that this is happening to ordinary people. They're making choices around the fact that they're their relationship doesn't work for them and they're looking for something, or maybe the whole model of monogamy is no longer working for them. And I have to say that it is being driven by a younger generation, people who are younger than me, who are saying, this doesn't work for me anymore. I'm not finding the right people, and I'm not meeting people who meet my needs. And I think it's that idea of when people were in relationships and they were settling because they felt that they had no alternative. Now people are making different choices about their lives going forward. It's about saying, if this relationship isn't working for me, I'm going to do something about it.
Vivian in Warwickshire says, Peter, what weird friends you have is repulsive. What a weird world we live in. The older I get, the more judgmental I get. Well, Vivian, I would, that's fair enough opinion. I would probably refer you to the words of Billy Connolly when he said, to understand someone, walk a mile in their shoes. And if you still don't understand them, who cares? You got the shoes. Lucy, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts there. Lucy Beresford is a psychotherapist. Fascinating discussion. And we do all sorts of things here. We talk about all sorts of things here on talkTV, including National Service. And Peter in Essex has been waiting very, very patiently on this particular issue. Peter, you're very welcome to talkTV this afternoon. What do you think about this plan, or this proposal anyway, that National Service should be brought back? Peter in Essex, are you with me? He is not. He is not. Well, we'll go to a break. We'll see if we can get him back and hopefully get him on the air in a few minutes here on talkTV. Very interesting one on the polyamorous relationships. Guy in Birmingham says, the best advice I ever got was from my elderly godmother. Don't ever get married, she said, because her children ended up in bad marriages. 53, single, gay and happy, says Guy. There we are. Well, thank you for that, Guy. Now, we have had on my Saturday show Cat of the Week for some time now. This has been a very, very popular section, and indeed there's something like, I'm afraid of, what is it, check up, Dave, a 5-month waiting list?
It's getting shorter.
It's getting slightly shorter?
It's getting
okay, all right, okay, but it's still long.
But
it's still a long
quite
time.
Long,
if you send your cat in, we do Cat of the Week. If you've never seen it, then it is a section we do, and we have lots of people who love cats. I love cats as well. I'm here for at least the next 3 weeks on a Sunday, between 1 and 4. Tech Up Dave is here with me in his palm. What are they? Palm trees?
Palm trees.
Palm trees on his ludicrous shirt, and he has been the mastermind behind not just Cat of the Week, but a new section. Tell us about this new section for Sundays for the next 3 weeks only, because we'll see if it works.
For the next 3 weeks only. So we have a lot of people saying, why can't we have our dog on Cat of the Week?
Yes.
And I just
because it's called Cat of the Week. I mean, the clue's slightly in the title.
Although we did have a dog the other week.
We did, yes, that's right.
So I just thought it'd be quite fun to open the floodgates.
But also, keeping within my love of rescue animals, adopt, don't shop. Go to a shelter to get your animal, whether it's a cat, a dog, a tortoise, a lizard, whatever it is, because animal shelters are filled to bursting at the moment with animals. And we have our very first Rescue Animal of the Week section. Play the ident.
Peter Cardwell's Rescue Animal of the Week.
Wow. So we've got, what have we got in there? We've got sheep.
There's sheep, there's a donkey in there, there's some, there's a couple of dogs, there's at least one cat, there's a cockerel. I think that's about it.
I mean, that's the first time I've seen that. Can we just play it again? Is that okay, Lauren? If we can, Lauren.
Peter Cardwell's Rescue Animal of the Week.
Brilliant. And below it, if you're watching on talkTV, you will have seen this, but if you're listening on Talk Radio, there is the hashtag there, adopt, don't shop. Who is our first animal of the week, rescue animal of the week?
Our first rescue animal of the week has to go down to one that arrived in my Twitter mailbox minutes after we announced this last Saturday.
Yes.
Not in yours, in
Not
mine.
In mine,
we
in
never
yours.
gave my Twitter handle
Well, they know
out.
you're the brains of the operation.
So the first rescue animal of the week is Mojo, the dog.
Mojo the dog. Let's see Mojo. There he is.
This is Mojo, the rescue dog from Newport RSPCA. She's nearly 10 years old, and she's been Carly's best friend for the last 9 years when she came to live with her. She loves going for a walk, dozing on the sofa and playing with her toys. Oh, and watching you and Peter on talkTV.
Well, that's lovely.
See, I get top billing.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Well, you're the number one. Well, yes. I think, in fairness, Mojo's the number one.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So Mojo is an absolutely beautiful dog there.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put this on my Twitter afterwards, at Peter Cardwell. I don't think you've sent me haven't sent me the Cat of the Week from yesterday.
No.
No, you haven't managed to have time to do that.
No.
So I will put both Cat of the Week of this week and Rescue Animal of the Week, Mojo, sent in by, we don't know how to pronounce her name, Carly's? Said it.
Carly's Lawrence McGraw.
Just lower your voice and say it in a Carly's whisper.
It's good.
Okay,
It's
tumbleweed.
Really.
It's spelled C-A-E-R-L-Y-S. I think it's a Welsh name, and I think it's Carly's. I'm not sure. Anyway, Carly's Lawrence McGraw.
Well, she's from Ebervale.
She is from Ebervale. Yeah, the clue is there. Well, thank you so much for that. Carly's apparently loves dogs, feeds birds, squirrels, ducks, and a homeless cat. My goodness, that is very, very nice.
Zoo.
And well, clearly a menagerie there. And Mojo is her dog, beautiful dog there, which I will put on my Twitter in a few minutes' time, whenever Tech Up Dave sends it to me. Dave, I think we're okay. I think we're full now for the next couple of weeks. So
full till Christmas.
Full till Christmas for both Cat of the Week and indeed Rescue Animal of the Week, whether it is 3 weeks or longer. But if you do want to send your animal in, or has to be a rescue animal, has to be unrescued from a shelter, adopt, don't shop, that's the mantra. How can you get in touch with us?
Whether you can tweet you.
Yes, at Peter Cardwell.
At Peter Cardwell.
Yeah.
Or you can send in a snail mail, in the post, photos, if you want to go really mad, to Rescue Animal of the Week, Peter Cardwell, talkTV, the News Building, 1 London Bridge Street, London, SE1 9GF.
To be brutally honest, it's a lot quicker if you just tweet them to us, but not everybody uses Twitter, and that's fair enough, and I'm sure there'll be lots of people who will want to take part in this. Dave, thank you. You've been innovative, you have been the brains of the operation, you've been administrative as well, you've done great work. Thank you very much indeed.
Now upset lots of animals.
And probably now upset lots of animals. Of the show. Let's start with William in Blaenau Gwent in Wales. William, actually, before I talk to you about national service, do you know how you pronounce this person's name? Welsh name, is it Careless? Carelys?
No idea.
Oh, okay, Caerlys. Don't know, sorry. Anyway, tell us what you think about national service.
Well, I missed national service because I wasn't one picked out for it. When it ended in 1958, not everybody was called up who was 18 years old.
It was a lottery by that stage, was it?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think of the concept, the idea? Were you annoyed you didn't get called up, or were you relieved, perhaps?
Well, all my friends got called up, and I didn't, so I joined up.
Oh, you joined up? Okay. So how long were you in the army?
Only 6 months.
Oh, and what sort of experience was it?
Well, as far as I was only during training, I had an accident during training and perforated an eardrum. And in them days, if you had a perforated eardrum, you were sort of kicked out.
Oh, that's a shame. And what do you think about 16-year-olds? Should they have the opportunity to do this? Should it be mandatory, or should they just have maybe a little taste of national service?
Well, I think it might have been good for some of our politicians to know what life was all about.
I think a lot of people will agree with you. Thank you very much indeed to William and Blaenau Gwent. Edwin is in Essex. I think you did national service, Edwin, is that correct?
That's correct, Peter. And I think it should be for 2 years for men and women, and it should be done via the army, and there should be an Army National Service Corps. And then the army would give military training and trade training.
But it's interesting, Edwin, because we had someone earlier on, a former, as far as I remember, someone who was a Navy officer for 7 years, and he had some of his superiors saying, why would we want people who don't want to be there?
Well, that's the thing, but I mean, this was the same when I did my national service. There were lots of people that didn't want to be there. They didn't want to have their long hair cut. They didn't want to take military discipline, but they were licked into shape.
Yeah. It's a fair point.
Yeah. And I think really it would do a lot for this country if it did come about, because it would mop up a lot of lazy people that don't want to work, and it would give them a purpose in life.
Okay, well, listen, thanks for those points. Really appreciate those, Edwin. Chris is in Devon, also wants to talk. Loads of people want to talk about national service, including Chris. Chris, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I'm actually at work today. I'm an HGV driver, so I hope my signal doesn't disappear on you.
That's okay. You're not holding a handset at the moment. You're on hands free, are you?
No. It's a Scania. It's got hands free built in. It's very constructed.
Go ahead.
I think it'd be a good idea, because a lot of youth these days and young adults get led astray by either poor parenting, etc. And I think going into the army, they get a chance of meeting people who are striving, eating. They can install a sense of discipline, maybe some sort of brotherhood or sisterhood mentality. That this country needs teamwork, and unfortunately, this country has gone down the boo tube. Really, it really has. Since 30, 40 years ago, we used to manufacture a lot of stuff. These days, the whole culture is twisted, and unfortunately, there's huge swaths of our population who are on big pharma drugs. You got our females are on.
So this might be a way to get people sort of back on the straight and narrow, Chris.
I think it just gives them a good chance to meet decent people, improve their contacts, and people need to reflect on themselves. Some of these youngsters have got huge twisted egos. They think they can run riot round towns and treat people like mugs most of the time. This whole culture is gone down the boo tube, unfortunately.
Well, maybe National Service is something that could turn that around. Chris, thank you very, very much indeed. That was Chris in Devon, our final caller of the day. We're going to go across the Atlantic now because Tricia Goddard is here between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock our time anyway. She's in Connecticut. Hello, Tricia. How are you?
Hello, nice to see you, Peter.
And
interesting
you as well.
Conversation. Yeah, interesting conversation. I think we need more youth clubs. I think we need youth clubs back.
But would teenagers go to them? Would they get off their phones? Do they want
they
to?
Do.
They
do
go?
already.
Yeah.
Where they exist, they're oversubscribed. Because everybody wants to be in on it. I mean, youth clubs do exciting things together.
Yeah, the Scouts, Girl Guides, Boys Brigade, all those organisations. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, what we're doing, nothing to do with that, but we've got the inside story, excuse the pun, from a female prison officer. She worked in some of the toughest jails with the toughest people. It's an absolutely remarkable story. Also, we look at anxiety with our Mind Matters. There's been a really interesting case, I don't know if you're aware of it, of some students at Harvard winning a case so that they're not chucked out of uni or their studies are put aside because they've had mental health issues. It's a really big one for university students starting now, that they're not, don't face prejudice because of their mental ill health. That, and in our faith panel today, one of the things we're discussing is to smack or not to smack.
I'm going to say no.
Wow, spare the rod, spoil a child.
No,
Truth in it or
Tricia.
not?
If you can't control a child, and if you can't control a child as an adult without resorting to smacking them, I'm afraid I just don't think you should be a parent.
I tend to agree, because if you're photographed